Here.
Baltazar de Anda Santana.
Here.
Margaret Bergamini.
Here.
Badri Lankella.
Here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ann. We do have a quorum. If our tech facilitator would please read our standard meetings opening statement.
All right. Well, welcome to our virtual transportation planning. Welcome to our virtual transportation planning and policy and planning board meeting. Sorry. We're going to cover a few basic items before beginning. If you lose connection at any point during the meeting, you can reconnect by clicking the link or calling the number on your original email. To members and city staff, members, if you are able, please activate your video and keep it on for the duration of the meeting. Staff, if you are able, please activate your video when you are speaking. Members are responsible for muting and unmuting themselves. To minimize background noise and distraction, please remain muted unless recognized to speak. Use the raise hand feature when you'd like to be recognized to speak, ask questions, or request a roll call vote. The chair will do the best to call on committee members in the order in which their hands are raised. Lowering your hand will take you out of the queue. Members of the public who have registered to speak, the name you entered in Zoom must match the name you entered in registration. You will remain muted until called upon. The clerk will tell you when your time is up. After speaking, a member of the body may ask you a question. If you need to share documentation with the board, please send it to the email listed in today's agenda. Panelists, you now have the ability to rename yourself. If you would like to add pronouns to the end of your names, we just ask that if you do, you put it at the end of your name. That way it doesn't change the structure of our naming conventions. Chair, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jesse. I see that we have TC Chair Kovich here with us too, so welcome, Chair Kovich. Approval of minutes from our April 19th, 2021 meeting, assuming all board members have had a chance to review those if they so chose. Is there a motion to approve? Please use the hand raise feature. Motion by Chris, second by Badri. Any discussion? Badri, I assume your hand is up from the second. Okay, great. All those in favor of approving minutes from April 19th, 2021, please unmute yourselves and say aye.
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 Opposed, no. Chair believes it's unanimous. If you'd like to register a no vote, please raise your hand. Seeing no hands raised, that's unanimous. We do not appear to have any public comment for items not on the agenda. Has that changed, Anne?
No, it hasn't.
Okay, thank you. Are there any communications, disclosures, or recusals from members of the board? Seeing none, we will move to our first item for the evening, Legistar 65068, extending the deadline for the Vision Zero Action Plan to March 31st, 2022.
I believe Renee.
Renee,
Yeah, okay.
yeah.
Sure.
Would you like to lead the discussion?
Sure. So as you know, or some of you know, the original Vision Zero resolution that was passed by the Common Council called for the action plan to be done in June of this year. However, quite a few different things have made that kind of a challenge for us, from just the pandemic and pausing a lot of engagement, which, was just kind of starting back up. Staff, a lot of staff was on work-share. There weren't any new staff that were brought on board to work on Vision Zero. So when a lot of us were on work-share, that definitely slowed down the process. But I think we are kind of picking back up with that work. And I think, as you know from a previous meeting, we intend to have our rough draft for presentation at the end of June meeting. So I feel like this new sort of timeline is more realistic and practical to come up with a good product that can help guide the work going forward.
Yeah, I would add that another consideration we have is that we have eight new council members recently joined the council, and we thought there can be a lot of value to having them involved in the process as well. So extending that will give us time to do that as well. And it's still our goal to try to finish everything by end of the year. But because the concern of November, everybody's busy with the budgets, and December that we have fewer meetings. So we request running to a little bit into next year as well. But we intend to finish the work by end of the year. Thank you.
Okay, any questions for staff? Chris, go ahead.
Thanks. So I know there's a handful of working groups that have been plugging away at this, and won't be a surprise to hear that some of the folks feel like there hasn't been enough working across groups and sort of coordination there to make sure that everyone's working towards a good final product. So do you see this extension as creating more of an opportunity to do that? And is someone thinking about how that could happen?
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that we have been talking about in our larger staff team, is just putting together some things to kind of support the teams. There, some people are, I guess there are people who are on all of them, and just trying to make sure that they are all working together and that they have the support that they need to create a product that goes together. I know Chris is on our safety-focused enforcement subgroup, and that's definitely something that we've been talking about a little bit as well. And I know just how we can best support, that work across ideas to make sure that they are, not in conflict with each other, and actually they support each other and make each other's work better. So that's something that we will be working on more this summer as we kind of start to get our draft strategies together and seeing how they work together and how the data that we're working on supports each other across that work as well.
Thanks.
Any further questions for staff? Is there, Badri, go ahead.
I just wanted to check. So there were a couple of projects, right, on like Mekki and Raymond and all, that were already planned for Vision Zero, lowering the speeds and all those projects are on hold for now, or are they going to continue?
So the projects will continue forward. I know that this group saw sort of the draft, and at the last Transportation Commission meeting, projects were approved. So those things will continue to move forward, as well as some other activities while this sort of larger 10-year plan is drafted. Yeah, work continues to happen and real projects are happening.
Okay, great, thanks.
Thanks, Badri. Thanks, Renee. Any further questions for staff? All right, is there a motion to recommend extending the deadline? Chris?
Yeah, I'll move extending the deadline to March 31st, 2022.
Thank you, Chris. There's a motion. Is there a second? Badri, is that a second?
Yep.
Thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of recommending extending the deadline for the Vision Zero action plan to March 31st, 2022, please unmute yourselves and say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Chair believes it's unanimous. If you'd like to register a no vote, please raise your hand. Seeing no hands raised, that's unanimous. Thank you. Our next item is Legistar 64975, amending the 2021 adopted capital budget for the Community Development Authority redevelopment to create a Village on Park redevelopment capital project and to authorize $3 million in capital improvements at the Village on Park by the Community Development Authority to be funded by incremental revenue proceeds from tax incremental district number 42, 14th Alderman District.
I believe we have Matt Wachter and Dan Rolfs here to provide just a brief description of it, and then they're available to answer questions as well.
Hi, Matt Wachter, Director of the Department of Planning, Community and Economic Development, as well as the Executive Director of the Community Development Authority. So the Community Development Authority is a separate body politic from the city of Madison, and it serves as our housing authority, as well as our redevelopment authority. And as the redevelopment authority, it owns the Village on Park Street, which is a former shopping center that we've turned into more of a mixed-use hub with a library, clinic. UW is a large presence there, a grocery store, and a number of sort of service uses, as well as some retail. And the Village on Park has sort of systematically, we've gone through and upgraded spaces as we've gone, and we've done most of the buildings at this point. And so the project that's before us is a multi-step transaction that I can walk through. I'll share my screen here so people can see what I'm talking about. Okay, so the proposal generally involves a first phase, which is demolishing the oldest section of the shopping center that has not been renovated. It currently is mostly used for storage that we lease out to some tenants. It also holds Reach Dane Daycare, and they plan to move out in the end of the summer. And that building currently costs us more to heat and cool than we make in lease revenue. And engineers have generally determined it's at the end of its useful life, and it was built as a bowling alley, I believe, originally. And so it's had many lives at this point. So the idea would be to demolish that building using the funds in this resolution and put back a surface parking lot and some stormwater solutions there, because then we'd immediately roll into phase 2, where we take an equivalent number of surface parking stalls offline to become construction sites. And that would house two things. One, it would be the Urban League is planning to build their Black Business Hub, which is a business incubator space for small businesses on the first floor with office above. So about a 60,000 square foot building owned and operated by Urban League would be on that corner. And then we would build back a parking structure on the back of it to largely serve that building, as well as to provide additional parking to the Village on Park. Because then our phase 3 would take the parking lot on the north end of the site offline to become an affordable housing development. That right now, I think we're programming at 60 to 80 units of affordable housing to go on that side in a phase 3. So the order of operations is partially so that we always have at least the amount of parking that we have today, because right now we have a parking crunch at certain times of the day. The users of Village on Park, there's a lot of turnover between the library, clinic, UW. There's a lot of people who come and go. So the building is occupied really from first thing in the morning up until in non-COVID times into the evening because of programming that's happening at those spaces. So the resolution in front of us today is to do a budget amendment to take TIF proceeds from an adjacent TIF district and do the demolition of the phase 1 work, and then to finish design and testing with the idea that we would have a design that would go to bid for the parking structure, and that would roll into the 2022 budget to actually build whatever that parking structure is. So the 260 stalls is planning's first blush as to what a 4-story parking structure could fit there. It's not been designed or engineered at this point. That's what these funds would go towards. So that's the broad strokes. Like Tom said, Dan Rolfs and Joe Gramacki are here, and they are on our TIF staff, so they can answer any questions related to how the financing works. Because this is unlike most projects that we do in that the funds are coming from TIF, from these overline taxing jurisdictions. They come through the city's budget process, and they end up at the Community Development Authority, which is sort of a adjacent, party who would actually do the construction and own the building at the end of the day. And so again, and this is Village on Park is it's owned by us, so it's one of the first projects that's happening in South Madison as part of a larger South Madison planning effort, as well as a larger city investment strategy that will use TIF and affordable housing funds to hopefully do a number of projects throughout South Madison. So that's the broad strokes of the transaction.
Okay, we do have some registrants for public comments, so we will go to them next. Our first registrant is Dr. Ruben Anthony, in support, wishing to speak from the Urban League of Greater Madison. Dr. Anthony, if you are ready and with us, you've got 3 minutes. You may begin when you're ready.
Well, good evening, and thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak today. As you stated, the Urban League supports this amendment. We have an opportunity to do something special in South Madison, and we have an opportunity to bring business and economic development into South Madison like it's never been done before. We have individuals that are ready to support these businesses. American Family has given us $400,000. We have another private citizen that's raising up to $250,000. We expect to have $1 million to support the businesses. We need the support of the city. We expect to not just revitalize the Village on Park, but we expect to have a renaissance to transform this area. We believe that this part of South Madison is the southernmost gateway into the city, and that we have an opportunity to do some economic justice here. The hub will respond to many years of planning where residents and stakeholders have said, let's do something special over here. Making the changes and providing the funds to rehabilitate or upgrade this site will give us the ability to move forward with some of the community wishes. The hub will create Madison's first place-based community of Black entrepreneurs, which will extend to a strong business ecosystem to the entire Dane County and city of Madison area. The city support is critical to make this project work. So I want to thank you for giving me a little bit of time to express our support tonight.
Thank you, Dr. Anthony. Are there any questions for the speaker? All right, seeing none, we had 2 other registrants. John Becker, Madison, Wisconsin, in opposition, not wishing to speak. Edward Lee, 5145 Winter Green Drive, Madison, Wisconsin, in support, not wishing to speak, also representing the Urban League of Greater Madison. All right, questions for staff? Alder Foster, go ahead.
Thank you. Would it be possible to pull the map back up again? I think that was helpful to get a better sense of what we're talking about. And obviously, there's a lot of things kind of in here, and so we're trying to focus on the transportation question. So, what's the current overall parking capacity on the site today?
It's about 440 stalls right now.
Okay. And then in phase 1, it would add 128. Is that right?
That's our best guess for a ballpark. Yep.
Okay. And then phase 2 would take out 120. Let me see if I've got the exact count. It is roughly that. And that would be for the future location of the business hub as well as the
Parking structure.
Station of the parking structure. And the proposed parking structure, granted, definition needs to go on, but as currently proposed, estimated at 260 stalls. So that's total, not net new.
Right, that's total.
So net 140 new from phase 2.
I think that sounds right.
Okay. And then what do we know? I mean, you mentioned, and we talked before this meeting as well. You mentioned sort of the kind of comments from current tenants about a need for more parking or some of the challenges with parking that have happened there historically. What do we know about actual utilization of the overall site parking?
Yeah, so it's mostly total, and Access Community Health has sort of, since they opened, brought it up that their patients have a hard time parking, and I think there's probably some of it's parking close to the building, given who they're serving. But it's anecdotal from our property management company that it's full through large swaths of the day. So we actually just got our bid from Strang to this afternoon to do a more robust parking study of what it'll be like with this proposed mix of tenants for demand, as well as firming up these numbers as to what exactly would go back in parking, especially once we sort of putting in new stormwater to meet the new stormwater ordinance, to know if this would be the actual number we'd get, or if infiltration would, eat up what's currently proposed as parking structure, parking stalls. So we've not conducted that parking study yet.
Okay. And not even like having parking utility or somebody drive through and do a quick count or anything?
No, we haven't. We have a third-party property manager, Founders 3, who reports on it and reports the complaints and doesn't. And we have another third party who does enforcement, because we do have an issue of people using parking lots as park and rides. So people will leave their car all day and they're not users of Village on Park. So it's a frequent issue, but I don't have numbers for you.
And as I'm understanding it, the proposal would be that CDA would own and operate the parking garage. Is that correct? And again, we talked a little bit about this ahead of the meeting, but can you speak about conversations about parking utility managing it instead of the CDA?
Yep. So the current proposal would be that, yes, that CDA would construct it and be responsible for ongoing maintenance of it. And we would utilize our property management or a subcontractor to actually manage the parking structure, sort of in tandem with managing the overall parking lots. We did have some preliminary conversations with parking utility, with Sabrina, and thinking that perhaps this would be an opportunity for the parking utility. At the end of the day, her comments were that this didn't seem like a sort of a good fit, and sort of I think probably it's not her mission. There's also a question of how much revenue is this going to produce, given that it's far outside of downtown, and that's all the farther the conversations went. And yeah, that's where we are today. Yep.
That was my last question for you, I think, is around that question, sort of operating model and revenue. So currently, it looks like it's all free parking, but maybe
yes,
the tenants pay for something. So could you speak to what's going on today, and then what the idea is for the structured parking, if that would continue to be free or who would be paying for it?
Sure. So it's currently all free. There are stalls when you get close to the buildings that are designated as very short-term parking for building users. So people zip into lanes to buy a donut and go back out. Access Community Health has their parking on their own parcel for the most part. I think if we would move to this sort of structured parking, we are really early in negotiations with Urban League as to sort of what their tenants need, because their building will have 40,000 square feet of all-day office user, and they're looking for a guaranteed spot that they would sort of pay for in that structure. And then the remainder spots would really be more probably for those transient parkers. So we'd have to have a split structure that would charge people differently if they're parking all day or if they have a pass versus transient. We've also been approached by other users not on Village on Park who want to know if they could do long-term leases. Access Community Health, Madison College, they are looking to have sort of guaranteed spots that they would be able to pay for, but we've only had initial conversations at this point as to what their need would be and what their time horizon would be.
Thanks, Matt. I did have a few questions for Tom Lynch.
Keep sharing. Do you want me to take this down? Sorry.
Yeah, I think you can take it down. Thank you.
Okay.
Tom, so again, obviously this is sort of a unique situation and sort of being proposed as a CDA parking structure. How would the parking utility, or how does the parking utility evaluate where it makes sense to invest in structured parking in the city?
I think we would do an occupancy study, probably, and then I think most of our parking garages, except for the Livingston garage, have been called them historic garages that have been here for 25 years. So I don't really know all the factors that go into that, but we do regularly monitor the occupancy of our garages.
So Livingston was really the kind of first net new garage in a while. Otherwise, it's been essentially replacement garages.
It has, and Livingston was kind of an interesting situation in that there was a parking need, and there was multiple developments that had that parking need, and so this appeared to be a way to leverage rather than giving. I'm just going to say dollars given to a developer to develop their own parking. The city said, why don't we use these tip dollars and develop parking that can be used for multiple uses rather than specific properties used.
So in some ways, somewhat similar to what's being proposed here, to have a structure that would serve multiple entities.
Yeah, in some ways, perhaps.
And so the 9.1 million estimate for net 140 stalls, calculator tells me that's about $65,000 per stall. Does that sound right to you in terms of what we should be kind of the price it would take to do that?
Actually, can I get back to you on that? I actually just had Sabrina calculate exactly how much it costs us for Livingston per stall and for Wilson. So if you, after our conversation now, I can get back to you within literally about 45 minutes.
Looks like Joe and Dan both jumped in too. Might have a response.
Go ahead, Joe. Or either one.
Alder, that 9.1 million was based on 260 stalls, I believe, not 140 net. So if you do the 9.1, I think our number was somewhere around 25,000 a stall.
Yeah, we were
the
working.
high end for structured parking.
And we were working, Alder, off of the assumption that we were trying to solve the parking issue that was being generated by the redevelopment of these separate pads. So the Urban League's Black Business Hub, the affordable housing proposal, and essentially the loss of those stalls. So there is a net gain of stalls, but we're also gaining, for lack of a better term, additional users and additional projects on the site. So the cost per stall, if you will, as Joe identified, is really closer to 20 to 25,000 per stall, depending upon how many total stalls we ultimately build.
So maybe the 120 that would be lost in phase 2 for both the business hub and the parking structure. What's the split of those two? So that's part for where the business hub would go and part for where the parking structure would go. What's the split of those?
When you say, go ahead, Matt, sorry.
Oh, I was going to say it's I think it's 50 odd, close to 60 on the front, and then slightly more on the back. Unfortunately, when they drew the graphic, they put the boxes over the count, so I can't see the layers to know what it is. But we can certainly follow up with planning who did the parking count.
I think we have additional information from planning as well that we could forward on to you that breaks down sort of the phasing over time of the demolition of the north building and the construction of those new stalls, the sort of phase 2 where both the business hub and the parking ramp are under construction, so the loss of those stalls during that construction period. And then the third phase where the affordable housing is being built on the northwest corner and the loss of those stalls to that particular use. And ultimately what we wind up with is, I think as been mentioned, roughly 140 net stalls, but that's upon the completion of all of those phases that will be, I think as Matt mentioned, a multi-year process.
So I guess I'm just trying to dial in a little bit on what we're gaining with this garage. So if we say it's 60 on the back, more or less, maybe there's a few more than that we would be basically losing in order to put the ramp. So we're losing 60 and building 260. So then we're only getting 200 new stalls. If we did nothing, we'd have 60 stalls. If we took those away and put a parking ramp, we'd have 260. So 200 new stalls then for 9.1 million. So then we're over 45 grand per stall.
So I think we also gain a development pad that is worth over $1 million. You know, like each of these pads are $1 million pieces of land, roughly, give or take.
Which pad are you talking about, man?
So like the Urban League pad, by freeing from being parked on, we gain a piece of real estate worth north of $1 million as well.
Right, but that's a separate, I think, calculate. I guess. So phase 1, we gain 128 overall stalls.
Yep.
And if you, again, take the parking ramp out of it, in order to free up that pad, you need to lose around 60 stalls. Right? So parking ramp aside, if you did the demolition proposing and gave this pad away, we would have 68 more stalls than we have today.
Yeah, I think the question is that pad developable without any additional parking for the use that it's going to have? And I guess that's the question mark.
Yeah, and so what are the estimates of that new development then?
Sorry, you broke up there. I didn't catch it.
That seems to be a primary driver of this overall plan. So how did you sort of model and project your expected parking demand for that new development for the?
Sure. So I'll be honest, it's in flux. The building has changed size and ratio of sort of incubator to office over time. And I'd say it's not designed yet, so it could still change more. But I think we'd anticipate that the building will generate a parking demand of 180 or so stalls of need for parking, given it's sort of Class A office plus relatively small retail, small retail spaces. Again, not designed, but that's what we're basing it on today, and that's why when we have Strang on board and Urbanly gets farther in their design process, we'll be able to refine those numbers to know, is it going to generate, need 150 stalls or is it 192 or whatever that number is.
And was there consideration of building stalls either underground or in the lower levels of that building?
So we had technical work with borings done last week. We don't have the results, so that will definitely drive some of these decisions. If we find out that it's going to be easy for Urbanly to go underground and cost efficient, we'd push for that. If we find that, in fact, no, it's better on our site, we'd move there. So all of those pieces can move around based on what we get back from our geotech and this design exercise.
Tom, have the I know our TDM ordinance is still sort of in the final refinement phases, but have we kind of tried to run this this building through that to get a sense of what we would be hoping to see in terms of parking?
No, we haven't, but we could. Our much of the TDM ordinance is focused on the employment. So let's say the permanent employees of Urban League, we would be targeting them to reduce trips. The retail component, particularly small retail, we're not necessarily targeting that. If we could run the numbers and see what the proposal is and what the TDM mitigation points would be and things that we would expect from that.
I think that would be helpful. I guess my last sort of questions are just around sort of very big picture transportation policy, strategy, et cetera. We've kind of defined here as a policy board this overarching goal for VMT reduction. It really is kind of key to the other big initiatives that have undertaken, including Vision Zero, transit, et cetera. How does parking play into that? And particularly for this site, with the proposed BRT access and South Transfer Point essentially right here, how does this question of adding additional parking capacity play into those big picture goals in your mind, Tom?
Was that directed towards me?
Yeah.
Oh, I was listening to your question, but I was wondering who's going to answer this.
I don't know who else would be better positioned to answer that.
Oh, this is a pop quiz. I think this site is of high importance. It will be well served by transit. However, not all trips can be necessarily made by transit there, and so I guess you probably have to balance that. I think we do want to reduce VMT. This is an excellent site to really invest in. It will have high transit score. That being said, a similar project, or the Madison College is directly south of this, and Metro Transit provides a very excellent service to them, and many students use it. And I've interviewed those students that use it, but they also have a high parking need, a high parking demand from just students coming from different parts of the city. So I guess I can't give an overall assessment.
Okay, I think those are all my questions. I have some comments, but I'll save them for after questions.
I do have the two parking figures. It is Livingston, which is above ground, is about 25,000 per space, and Wilson, which is below ground, is about 67,000 per space.
Thank you, Alder Foster. Thank you, staff members who contributed to that conversation. Chris, you're up next.
Thanks. I'm trying to keep track of all the numbers here and figure out what exactly the vision is that we're talking about. I think, I mean, if you just match the stalls in the garage, the new garage to just the new Urban League building, I mean, that's, I think, more than 4 spaces per 1,000 square feet. But then I'm hearing that like there might be 550 spaces at the end of the day, all taken. And I don't know what, no, Alder Foster shaking his head. So it's confusing. So I don't know, like, what kind of numbers are we aiming for? And like, it's really hard to know what the vision is and what the conflicting needs are by time of day and things like that. Is that something we've looked at, or is it sort of, yeah, where are we at in that process?
Sure. So the vision is during these phases of construction to not have less parking than we have today. So that's number one, is sort of while under construction to maintain roughly the same number of parking stalls. And then when all the phases are done, the goal is to replace any parking stall that gets a building put on it to serve our existing users at pretty much the same way they're served today. And then to be able to self-park the affordable housing, to have the parking structure, park the Urban League, and then the other, and if we end up with net increase in parking stalls, I think there's demand for it, but we're going to try to determine that. But if we replace all the stalls, serve the Urban League, and have excess parking capacity, it lets us take more surface lot offline to build other things. We might have to take more stalls offline to handle stormwater, because what I didn't mention is we have historic stormwater problems on this site. 3 or 4 years ago, the basement of this building flooded, and we did an engineering project to move water along the top of the site, along the back of the building, but it didn't solve all the problems on the site. So we need to probably put in some significant stormwater infrastructure in here, be it a green roof on top of the parking structure, or taking stalls away to do infiltration on site. And then there's also the possibility that Buick Street will eventually cut through the site and take away 50 or 60 parking stalls. That's a concept that's in the South Madison plan. It's not vetted. So that's something that could happen in the future. We don't know. That's not, I guess, I don't know if that's a vision. The overall vision for the site is to densify it, add jobs, add affordable housing.
Okay, that was helpful to the extent that it could be. So I guess as part of that vision, I mean, I think we also want to see the things that Alder Foster was talking about that would be within the TDM realm of things. So I think, you know, if we've got a bunch of employees being served by this, we would want to make sure that employees who aren't driving aren't implicitly paying the cost of this structure to whoever owns it, and all these things, you know. So, I mean, theoretically, this will all be covered through the TDM program, maybe. But do we have an opportunity to require those things through this process?
A question for me or for Tom? I don't know. So, I mean, I'd say that because we're the owner of the land, we're the owner of the parking structure, we're in active negotiations with Urban League. If there's things that we want, we can certainly, push for those as part of our negotiation.
Okay. And then just to clarify on, Tom, did you want to add anything or? Okay.
You raise an interesting point in that this would go through development approval farther into the process, and at that time we may have our TDM ordinance up and running. So I think it would be subject to our TDM ordinance, wouldn't it, Matt?
Sounds right. We'd have to,
Yeah. Okay, one more. Just trying to clarify what it is we're actually talking about tonight, because there's this $9 million for garage, but we're really only talking about the first $3 million right now. That would fund the planning and I guess putting it out to a consultant, and I'm guessing part of the construction, because that's a big chunk of money, maybe.
So it would cover the demolition of the north building and building that parking structure. So that's a big chunk of those dollars. It would cover our design work, cover all the various consultants to do master site planning, all of those things. So it's the money we would expect to spend in 2021, with the remainder going into the regular budget process for 2022.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Chris. Alder Foster, go ahead.
Thanks. I wanted to just try and shed a little bit more light for Chris. So I would, I've been quite surprised to see the proposal for this without any analysis done around utilization and demand. And I wrote out there today and counted, and I came up with 432 stalls. So I think that's pretty much in line with the 440 estimate that we heard. This was about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. 154 of them were occupied. 278 were empty. 64% were empty. Now, clearly, times of COVID, right? So we could expect that to be a different number. That being said, a lot of our other transportation conversations have been about how do we try and keep this new COVID norm from creeping back to what we used to have. And even creeping back to what we used to have, I see Balthazar just raised his hand. I remember doing an event there for kids on bikes. The entire north section of that parking lot is almost always completely empty. I rode my bike past there on a daily basis, commuting to work for 10 years. And I can tell you, while you have certainly heard from folks that there's no place to park, I have zero confidence in that. And what I saw, there were a lot of cars around access. There was still capacity there, but I can easily see how that might, for the stalls closest to access, that those are filled up, and so we might have to drive another 20 yards to park in the big empty section. But all the peripheral parking was open. It's just not even close. And for us to be contemplating such a massive investment, specifically at a place that's going to be about the most transit rich in our entire city, following over $100 million investment in BRT, this is not even partially baked. And I'm very supportive of the broader goals in this side of town. I'm supportive of the Black Business Hub. One of the goals that, Matt, that you mentioned was not losing capacity through this process. I think it's really important for us to understand, if as long as we're willing to and apparently very interested in demolishing that northernmost part of the building that needs to go anyway. That's my understanding. Like, regardless, the goal is to take that down. That's going to bring in 128 new spots into a parking lot that I feel very confident already has excess capacity. And we would take about 60 offline to build the Black Business Hub. But even again, without talking about a ramp at all, structured parking and a $9 million investment, we can pay for the demolition, get that paved, add in 128 stalls, and we're only losing 60. And I really think we need to focus there at this point and really take our time and do some strong analysis and see what we can do to not build a $9 million structure. We absolutely need to be able to accommodate the plans for the Black Business Hub. But the other thing that I saw today in that parking, every single one of the short-term stalls were open. All of the visitor, shopper kind of stalls. My hunch is that it's probably 80% or more of the parking that's out there is employee parking. And that's exactly the kind of stuff that we need to be able to target through TDM and move people onto a bus. And if we spend $9 million in public money to then we're not going to get it back. We're not going to start charging market rates out there, or the market rate is basically zero. We are literally shooting ourselves in the foot. We're saying don't take the bus because you can ride here and park for free. And so I think this is, I get the intent behind it, but from a transportation policy perspective, this is not well thought out, and we need to really slow down, move forward with the demo, free up the space, move forward the Black Business Hub, and then really spend our time figuring out what's needed out there and not work off of assumptions of some of the tenants saying, hey, parking's really packed up here, we need more parking. We have to challenge ourselves anytime we want to build more parking, and particularly structured parking that's that expensive. So I'm really asking that we take a pause here, rethink, move forward with a much lighter version of this, and do not recommend a parking structure unless we've really convinced ourselves that there's no other option and there's no way to meet the needs of the current and the future tenants out there.
Thank you, Alder Foster. Baltazar, you're up next. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I do agree with, I think some of the things that Alder Foster mentioned. We used to have an event on Saturday mornings, and obviously there was, around 8 a.m., 8:30 a.m., there was some spaces out there. I have to then go back to the fact that many of the times that me or some of our students at Latino Academy have to go to that area, there is always that need for parking. As someone who loves biking, as someone who loves, transportation, I think we shouldn't not put, spaces there for folks to take the bus, because, folks might only have the opportunity to take a car, and I do agree with everything that is being said, but we shouldn't use this as an experiment to bring some folks, to make folks to take the bus or to take the bicycle. I think, this is an opportunity to invest in our community. I do agree that there are going to be some times where that parking lot is going to be empty, just like many places in downtown are empty during the day, just like many other areas are empty during the day. I work in that area, and I partner with some of the folks, in that area. And I don't know if you have ever gone to a meeting in the middle of the day and trying to find a spot there to park. It's very, very hard. I didn't used to have that issue when I used to bike. Now that I also drive my car, it is difficult, and many of the folks who are going to be driving a car are folks just who have cars, who have 3-5 kids, who are going to need a space to park. So, anyways, I just put it out there. I don't think we should use this, this as an experiment, to bring some folks and for folks to be able to take the bus instead of driving. I think this is fair. I think this is an equity move for a region that have hardly had any support, specifically around that area.
Thanks, Baltazar. Joe, you had your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, I think I need to reiterate a couple of things for this body, because in the discussion and the referral of this before TPBB and the discussion, I guess as an implementer of policy rather than a creator of policy, I have to make a couple of things evident. The first one is that when Alder Foster, you keep saying that we're spending $9.1 million. And I've said this before, and I said this at finance, I've said this at other places. This is a rough estimate of 260 stalls using the maximum amount per stall that we've seen, okay, which doesn't mean that it'll be 9.1 million. It could be 7 million. It could be 6 million. Could be after we engineer this, after this proceeds from this committee, which right now it's where it's landed. That's when all the due diligence will occur. And I think some of the statements you've made are a bit confusing to me, because I think you're inferring or intimating that we're not trying to conduct due diligence. We are. That's why we're here before this body. This is why we put a TIF plan together, why we have the funds and we've analyzed that to pay for this. And again, the South Side has been disinvested for the last 50 years. So staff is taking it very seriously. Now, having said that, CDA is a private entity. And it is not part of, when we say we, what are we going to do? This is not a parking utility project. It would be the CDA. Now, ultimately, council and the finance committee would decide whether to fund this. And that's part of the process. But are you suggesting that all future private deals will have to come before this body? For instance, to get their parking approved? Because if CDA is eligible for such scrutiny, then the project I'm working on right now with with the University Research Park, which I think is adjacent or even in your district, which is proposing another 600 or 700 stalls, I think that would come under this scrutiny also, as would a number of other projects that TIF staff is being proposed right now. It's being proposed to us that has parking. I mean, parking is a fact of life right now with real estate development. And is this where the direction is going, that we'll have to refer all our projects to parking because TIF will be used for parking? I guess I'm asking that as an open question to this body. If so, then we'll have to have separate referrals from finance to TPBB to analyze what each individual private developer's parking needs are going to be. And I just can't see that would be workable. I guess I'm looking for the body. This is the first time I've ever been to this group in 23 years of my career. And I guess I'm a bit confused on that. I'm looking for a little direction as to if this is going to apply to a private entity like CDD or CDA, then are we going to go for the whole enchilada? Are we going to go for, Anchor Bank, University Research Park, and a number of other private developers and analyze their parking for them? Just an open question.
Alder Harrington McKinney, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you for clarifying exactly what is before us to consider tonight. And I'm specifically talking about the Villager Mall. For 10 years, my nonprofit organization, not mine, but one that I worked for was housed in the Villager, and parking was horrendous. Literally, at the time I had a disability parking permit or sticker, and even finding the few spaces and locations that I could use that was very limited. If parking over a 10-year period, and that's from 2005 to 2015, was a problem with the capacity that it was then, and we are considering a Black business hub, there is no way that that we cannot look at adding and providing parking for that new growth. When we're looking at parking modality, we're looking at versatility, a versatile modality of parking. Everybody's not going to be on BRT, and pushing them in that direction is not going to work. Everybody's not going to be a biker, and pushing them to that direction is not going to work. I live on the far west side, and there was no bus that would get me down to my place of employment on time, and the flexibility of me moving around. And so I was required to drive a car. I've been in the Villager Mall and been there through all of the deprivation of parking, and to not consider having additional parking to this space as we are developing, and I said we, as we're looking at Madison College and the Black Business Hub and the nonprofits that's there is an overwhelming need. And so my colleague said that he drove there and he did a look-see. That's fine, but that's COVID related. I mean, many people are working from home, and I would ask this body to consider that. There's just where are people going to park? Those individuals who must drive a car, who are not going to be on BRT, who are not biking. And so we have a responsibility of looking at the versatility of transportation modeling. I am absolutely supporting this, because where are people going to park who must, for various reasons, have to drive a car? And the consideration that I've heard, even from my colleague, in terms of all of the vacant spots, I am one that says that parking has been and always has been a challenge for the Villager Mall. It will continue, and it will grow, and it will expand as we're putting these various spaces on the Villager Mall, the building, the Black Business Expo, and the even Madison College is finding themselves without parking. And so this is a challenging area, and I would ask that my colleagues consider that as they're making policy decisions. And it is not the first time that the city has not done, my colleague asked, a proposal on analysis. And so forgive me for being new on this board, of not knowing all of the intricacies, but I know firsthand that parking is an issue at the Villager Mall, and we must plan for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Harrington McKinney. Chris, go ahead.
Thanks. First of all, I'd like to respond to Joe Gramaki's comments earlier. Those took me aback a bit, actually. One of the things that was said there was that this board is the implementer of policy, not the creator of policy. I think that's not a fair characterization at all. I mean, that's the kind of thing we hear at Transportation Commission, which I also serve as, which says that we are not allowed to interpret policy. That's up for TPVB. What we are here for is to implement policy that is adopted by the city, including the comprehensive plan and other long-range plans and other policies in place. So we are looking at this proposal with an eye for how it aligns with the policies and goals of the city. Also, we do weigh in on how much parking belongs on sites to the effect that it works towards those goals, especially when we're talking about $9 million of TIF money in a proposal that also has $200,000 for affordable housing. I think that deserves scrutiny from this board. And the city will be looking closely at parking throughout the city through its TDM program. This is not off the table. This is not out of question. So that's why we're having this discussion here now. To the point of existing parking issues, I'm sure that there are parking problems at the site now, and there will be parking problems on the site in the future. As we've talked about, those parking problems are not necessarily because of a lack of parking, and nor will they be due to a lack of parking in the future. We've already heard that part of the problem is that people simply can't park right in front of the building they want to go to. That's feeding people's perception of parking. And apparently we already have issues with commuters, park and ride commuters using the lot, presumably for free. So those are real parking issues that should be addressed and considered before moving forward with building a bunch of expensive parking. So those are just my thoughts to what I've heard so far in this conversation. That said, I mean, I'm looking at the language in the amendment that's in front of us, and it doesn't talk a whole lot about parking. It is about these first phases, which I'm fully in support of the city supporting this project. And a lot of what I'm hearing is great. So I'm contemplating some sort of motion that supports moving forward with this initial round of money, but not without the understanding that a parking garage will be contingent on a comprehensive parking study to understand what the problems are and what we're actually trying to achieve, understanding that there will be TDM, that this will not just be free for all parking, and that the right programs will be in place. And then the only other thing that I'm contemplating right now is the language at the end of this amendment basically says that we would recognize that the $11 million for capital improvements identified in the project serve a public purpose. And I'm not really comfortable supporting the idea that a $9 million parking garage serves a public purpose. So if there's interest in putting forward some kind of motion to that effect, I would be happy to do that at some point.
Thank you, Chris. Margaret, go ahead.
Thank you. Mr. Cahill already covered a number of the points that I was also going to make, so I appreciate that. And I would be interested in supporting such an amendment, such language. I think that anytime we're asked to use TIF money to support parking garages, particularly when, I mean, I'm not an expert in TIF policy, et cetera, especially as it has evolved in recent years, but the idea that we would be spending $9 million specifically dedicated to parking and only a couple $100,000 for affordable housing, that's the way the subsidy would work. It has me very, very puzzled. And to one of the points that Mr. Gromacki made, I would expect that any project that is asking for TIF monies to subsidize parking structures or parking lots, yes, would come in front of this committee, which has not existed for 24 years. It's existed only for a couple of years. It would have come in front of the Transportation and Parking Commission 20 years ago. So all of that said, obviously this is a prime site. It's an important part of the city. It's a part of the city that deserves the city's support. Obviously, there's already been some investment in the area. There should be more. It's a very exciting project, but there are a lot of unknowns, and this body is doing what it is supposed to do by asking these questions.
Thank you, Margaret. Alder Foster.
Thanks. I guess looking to Matt Walker, so to the points that have been raised about wanting to allow the other components of the project to move forward, so that the demolition and sort of resurfacing on the north part of the building and pre-development related to the Black Business Hub, but not supporting pre-development and design for a parking structure at this point. How does both what's in front of us, and it obviously references the TID amendments as well that aren't here, but they're connected with it. They're also will be at council. Do you have any suggestions of how to kind of separate those things so that the amendment could happen to move forward with those other elements, that it does not give approval to move forward with, I guess beyond the parking analysis and study, that money would not be going towards pre-development costs of a structure beyond that at this point?
That's tricky. Part of the issue becomes a timing issue, that if we had to run another budget amendment to be able to do the pre-design work, I think we would not be able to and let's say that the analysis says that we do in fact need a parking structure. We would not be able to deliver the parking in time for Urban League's project. They're on a tight timeline because they have new market tax credits is their main funding structure, which has a timing component to it. And they also have their credit tenants have a set move-in date. So if we can't deliver the parking that either the study says that they need or their tenants are going to demand, then their project won't move forward. But I don't know, I haven't mapped out what that timeline is. Probably not a super satisfying answer. Because running another budget amendment is not a fast process. I mean, it adds, a month or so at least to it. I don't know if Joe or Dan have insight into that timing effect. I say, speaking on behalf of the CDA, if we find that we don't need to build a hugely expensive parking structure, we won't build a hugely expensive parking structure. But I don't know what those numbers are today.
Well, and I guess this is something to think on, because on the one hand, I'm sort of hearing, well, this is just a timing issue. We just need to sort of, we need to go ahead, but then we're going to do our due diligence, do this robust parking analysis, et cetera. But if it turns out the answer is yes, we don't have time to come back and ask for permission to move forward. So, I mean, it's really difficult to ask for a budget amendment and approval to do this thing that we don't have any data that supports it at this point.
Right. So this is part of the reason we tried to split it between a budget amendment to do the pre-design work and then actually having in the budget to go ahead and do the project. I mean, the truth is that because it's a CDA project, there will be a lot of touch points at CDA to approve every contract and every bit along the path. but that's separate from the city process because CDA, is a separate entity.
Yeah, and I'm not really focused on those detailed decisions. I'm focused on the policy decision. That's the reason it's at this board right now, and what I think is the most critical question that will be in front of the Common Council that we're trying. We're supposed to be giving a recommendation to the council around the transportation policy component of this. And personally, I do not feel like we have any reason to suspect that this is a good investment from a transportation policy perspective, but would like to be able to allow the other components to move forward. But I'm not hearing from you a good way to do that.
So just so do you want a touch point between getting a parking study, which we need this resolution to be able to pay for, and actually pulling the trigger on getting an architect and engineering team to design something because we want to know what that number is?
Yeah, I think we need an explicit decision point before moving forward with any parking structure, and that should come after we've had the parking study. And right now, the resolution and the memo clearly reference an up to $9.1 million layout for the parking structure. The be it further resolved clause of this resolution in front of us says we recognize that 11.2 of total TIF investment serves a public purpose, which we just heard from Chris saying I'm not convinced of that, and I'm not either. So how do we get? Is there a way to recommend approval of a smaller amount or be explicit that we're approving an amendment to move forward with demolition and resurfacing of the northern section and pre-development for the Black Business Hub, but not and a parking study, but not pre-development design costs for a parking structure at this time?
Well, I think so that would be your amendment is you take that out, and that would force us to do another budget amendment in order to do the pre-design work. I think it's just a question of what does that look like for timing? I don't know, Dan, if you have thoughts on what that does to the project schedule.
Sure. If I could touch on that here, one of the major concerns that we've had since this process has started is the urban league's very extremely compressed time frame to get from here, which is a vacant parking lot, to a building that is open and available for their credit tenants. And that time frame is extremely, extremely tight. We've had lengthy conversations with Urban League staff about, if that's feasible, how we're going to move that along, and anything that we can do to minimize that time is going to be critical because their Black Business Hub is predicated around several things, one of which is these credit tenants that are taking the Class A office space. They need those to provide essentially the funding that allows the business hub, this incubator, to function. And if we miss those deadlines and timelines for those credit tenants and they lose them, their ability to make the Black Business Hub portion of the building and the incubator portion work isn't there anymore. And I don't want to speak for them. I know that Dr. Anthony is here, but that's our understanding of how this goes. And to make sure that we can meet the needs that they've got, we are working extremely hard. Any of the staff who are working on this can attest to the fact that we're having multiple meetings a week to try to make all the pieces fit together. And it's everything from land division and sale and the development agreement that we'll have to making sure that we're addressing these parking issues. And all of them fit together. And I think Matt Wachter alluded to this a little bit already, is the need to build a big parking ramp is not the first thing that we want to do. We don't need to spend $9 million and we only need to spend $7 million. That's great. I think the way we've kind of described it is whatever we can get the appropriate amount of parking with the least money expended is the best way to go. And as has been talked about a couple times here, and I think Matt alluded to it as well, is we need to make sure that we have that study done. But then as soon as we know whatever that's going to look like, we need to be able to move forward expeditiously. So anything that puts additional time in there, it's just more time that we're going to have to sort of come back and hopefully not have, or excuse me, hopefully make sure that we can still deliver on time for the Urban League the use, or excuse me, the parking that they need, regardless of what that looked like, whether it's underneath their building or in a structure or something else. So the other piece I wanted to touch on, just want to have for 1 second here, is several folks have alluded to.
Hold on, Dan, hold on.
Sorry.
Is this about the timeline? Because that was just the question that was asked.
That is my comment on the timeline.
Okay, so yeah, so just for staff, I know we've been kind of loose with our hand rules. After the presentation, unless there's a question specifically by a board member, simply raising the hand won't give you the floor privilege that it does to board members. So thank you for your response on that.
Thanks, Chair. Before I wanted to just follow up on that timeline question. So, I mean, I hear what you're saying, Dan, but I mean, I guess this is not as if we didn't, like, if the parking ramp, at whatever size it ends up being recommended, like if it's not there and ready to open the day that their tenants are there, that we can't meet the parking need. I mean, we've already, based on the information that was shared, if we do the demolition and repave that part of the building, we're adding 128 new stalls. We take 60 out for the Black Business Hub. I mean, we've already added 68 stalls to a parking lot that this afternoon had almost 300 empty stalls. So, 300 plus empty stalls, and this opens day one, probably not fully leased out, et cetera. So if you're building and sizing a ramp for some anticipated future demand, that doesn't have to be ready day one to be able to meet the whatever the demands are of whatever those core tenants are. The CDA could reserve spots for those tenants on a surface parking lot, correct?
The CDA will work out, as we have with other tenants, we'll work out how many stalls are allocated. And I would defer to Matt to talk about that. The other piece that we will need to have ironed out is the Urban League is going to sign a lease leases with their credit tenants. And in those leases, the credit tenants are going to want specific number of stalls, whatever those numbers are, allocated for their use. And the parking study that we're looking at doing is, and if there's excess stalls there, great. And we don't need to build a ramp, that's fantastic. We can do other things with these dollars. But if we do need to do it, we need to be able to convey to Urban League and specifically their credit tenants that we can meet the needs that they've got in an expeditious manner, because the credit tenants aren't going to want to sign a lease until they know with an ironclad lease certainty that they have their parking needs met. So that's something that we need to know so that we can convey it to them and to their credit tenants in advance of them working to construct their business hub. They're going to need to have all those pieces lined up before they put spade one in the ground to actually turn dirt and build their structure. So it's the need is down the road in the sense that it won't actually happen until the building is occupied. But the entities that are going to fund, or excuse me, that are going to sign leases for that building are going to need to have assurances, and that'll be written into their lease, that their parking needs are met, just like they would have with think we have Access has a certain number of stalls, and I believe there's other uses too that have, other other tenants that have specific stalls allocated for their use in their leases at the Village on Park. So,
right. So just to clarify that, Dan, I mean, I guess that's the point. It's just like we have those lease agreements with those other ones for surface parking stalls. There's no reason why those can't be satisfied with surface parking, and it doesn't actually require a structured parking element to satisfy those needs. So those leases could get configured, it could be worked out, and of the 500 surface parking that will be available by the time that would open, absent a parking structure, those leases could still happen. They're not tied to it being a structured parking that would bring in a net 120 stalls.
Assuming that the tenants are willing to accept and that we have them available after we complete the parking study, we would have to work out that arrangement with those tenants. But we are not involved and engaged in that. Plus, we don't have the results of the parking study yet. So if we don't need to build it, great. We can do other things with those dollars. But if we
I mean, the question around the timeline, though, I mean, what we're trying to, the point was there would be an issue with the land, like basically just having the parking study come back and be evaluated publicly before committing to building a parking structure. I mean, that's basically the ask at this point. And the concern is, well, that could add a month.
I would say a month to 6 weeks. Yeah.
In the best case, in the scenario where the study recommends a new structure, then that theoretically would mean the structure would open a month later than if we didn't have that come back. Or it may say we don't need a structure at all, and we move forward and we don't spend that money on the structure. So I guess my point is that I don't see the concern with adding a month to the timeline for a potential structured parking in order to have that due diligence and public oversight.
I cannot tell the TPPB or the Common Council how to run your processes. That is up to you as policymakers and to the council to do that. What I can say is any delay that we've got is going to make it more difficult for us as the city and the CDA to try to ensure that we've got the things necessary in place to deliver the things necessary, whether it's the site or parking or anything else, to the Urban League so that they can secure their credit tenants. The other point that I would make is, as staff, I think I can say this. Matt and Joe, you can't see me looking at you, but I am. We are not interested in building a parking ramp that's not necessary. If the parking study comes back and says you don't need it, then that's great. We can do other things with those dollars. What if we do need to do it? Then we want to be able to move expeditiously so that we can help the Urban League move their project forward.
Thank you. And I'll just end with one last statement. I think we need to be really careful about a parking study telling us what we need to do. A parking study will, if it's a good one, will give us a range and we'll talk about here's what you could do here, here's what we might expect, here's what we don't know. And the question of whether we should build a structure and what size of a structure we should build is a policy decision. And it does need to come back and be made publicly. And we should not be agreeing to that and then saying, and as long as a parking study that we commission says we do need it. That study needs to come back, needs to be publicly evaluated, and we need to vote on whether we want to move forward with the structure. So that's my comment to the board members.
Thank you. Alder Harrington McKinney.
I'm on mute, excuse me. I would like to hear Joe's comments, and then I would like to make my comments after that. I saw your hand up, Joe.
Oh, thank you.
Joe, go ahead.
I was waiting for quite some time, so thank you so much for your consideration. The first thing, there was a comment, I believe it was from Mr. McCahill, I'm not sure, but something, or maybe it was Alder Foster, about public purpose. The public purpose language is required by law. Anytime we've spent TIF, it's in every TIF resolution that comes before the council. So if we're going to spend any amount of TIF, and regardless of what it's for, I would advise you against eliminating that. I think that was the question or the suggestion in one of your resolutions, is that you're going to take out the statement about public purpose. You know, if you want to reduce, you know, 9.1 million to 3 million, that's your prerogative, but don't take the public purpose language out. Otherwise, we can't spend the money on the study and the other things, because we have to declare that these dollars are going for a public purpose. So that's the other thing. I think my earlier comments were somewhat misconstrued. I was talking about myself, whether I had the ability to do this stuff, which I don't, obviously. I don't have the ability to tell you what policy is. You know, council ultimately does that. As in, you know, when I refer to myself as an implementer, I'm the guy that has to make the call based on the rules you guys make, you know, council as well as this body. So I believe that, you know, my preface in my comments was misconstrued as to mean that I'm questioning this body. I'm not questioning this body. My concern is that going forward, I'm going to have to change. If this is a policy, I'm going to have to change the way every project comes in and bring it before this body. If parking, which is a usual culprit in creating gaps for projects downtown or on the east side or even on the west side, it'll be coming before this body. And I have a heck of a time as it is debating with developers, you know, about how much parking they need. So I guess from that perspective, I welcome your input. And you guys can step out in front and you know, take positions on stuff. All that ends up doing is either saving the city some money in terms of parking, or the developer walks away, one or the other. So that's, you know, from my standpoint, takes some pressure off of me to have policy people that can step in like that. So typically I've been the one to, you know, Dan and myself and other TIF staff have been the ones to sit there and pore over these projects about how many parking stalls they need. And I'll be honest, I've seen deals come in that want 8 stalls per 1,000, that sort of thing. I don't think this proposal before you is unreasonable. I think it comes out at, I think right now we're at about 1.8 or 2 per 1,000. I think when we build another 260 per 1,000 square feet, I think we're at, or is it 10,000? We're at a much higher, but not, you know, not suburban grocery store level as far as a parking ratio. So the proposal that's being asked is probably one that if it came into us as a TIF application would be considered reasonable as far as the percentage. I think what you're talking about, what I'm reading from this discussion, is that you have concern about the price, the cost of that. No, that's valid. We acknowledge that because we're giving you the high end of that, which is around $9 million. It very well could be less than that. It could be because we need less units. But to hold this up and potentially lose the Black Business Hub, which is really the linchpin of why we're doing this, to start this off, I think would be unfortunate if we were to lose that, even with a 6-week delay. I think I will leave that to the representatives of the Urban League to represent their position on a delay. But from our standpoint, we're only communicating what they've told this body, which is what my colleague Dan Rolfs, you know, accurately portrayed. This is on a very tight timeline. And all the study in the world is basically going to come up with a number for parking one way or the other. And we need to move, whatever that number is, we need to move expeditiously on that. So that concludes my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Alder Harrington McKinney, your hand is still up. Did you have further?
Yes, thank you. I just want to summarize what I heard. And what I heard is that the parking structure and the forward movement of the Black business enterprise, they're uniquely tied together and they're supported together. And to move towards separating these two entities could possibly delay the effectiveness and the timing of the Black business enterprise. And what I also heard is that when the parking study is done, it will then determine what's needed and what's not needed. And that parking study will come back before this body for final determination. And so my concern and question is, does this body want to risk not having the Black business enterprise move forward on the timeline and have it delayed because we are making decisions about a parking structure, which we get an opportunity to make those determinations before money is spent, before the building, before the structure is built. These two entities, the parking structure and the Black business enterprise, are tied together. And that's how it's written in terms of how the Urban League will be able to occupy and get tenants to make a commitment based upon that parking structure. Now, when the study comes back, we still have the opportunity to weigh in and say what's needed and what's not needed. But to jeopardize the entity that the Urban League is putting forward is something I'm asking, is that what we really want to do? Because ultimately it's going to come back to this body eventually to make those decisions in terms of what it's cost, how many stalls, whether it's needed, is it larger or smaller? All those considerations will come back to us to make those decisions. Right now, what is before us in terms of what the staff has repeatedly said is that timeline are married so closely together that separating one jeopardizes the other. And my question is that what we want to do? I heard that we are supporting, the Black business enterprise. We're supporting that. Well, are we supporting it or are we not supporting it? And I would ask us to make that consideration today or tonight, and to know that it's going to come back to us anyway for final determination. And do we want to hold it up, jeopardize it in how this conversation is going forward tonight? So that's my comment. Please don't do that.
Thank you, Alder Harrington McKinney. Baltazar, you're up next. Go ahead.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. So, thanks everybody for all the input about this. My biggest concern is the fact that, we are talking about having a study that is going to delay this support. I think the study has already been done, by many of the folks who go into those places. Everybody who has received classes at Mason College, at the Urban League, folks who have gone through that place. I think, we have seen it. I don't think, humbly, I'm gonna say that we don't need to delay this. I put a question to the board, like, how many of us have been to that place? How many of us have received a service from the Urban League, from Mason College, have gone to the Wingra Clinic? I think experience can only tell us. I think we go back to try to figure out the studies. I think our community has already, witnessed that. I think, it's time to move on and support this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Baltazar. Chris, go ahead.
Thanks. Lots to talk about. I'll just try and be brief here. I think we've been put in kind of impossible spot because we're being asked what I think what most of us believe is a good project. And as a transportation policy board, we're being asked to weigh in on the transportation piece of this project that we don't all agree on is great or necessary. So I think ultimately it's up to Common Council to decide, whether these two go hand in hand, whether the parking and the project are inseparable. I think as the Transportation Policy and Planning Board, we ought to weigh in on what we believe is appropriate for transportation policy, and let Common Council take that as they will. So if I'll make a motion and see if I get a second that we approve the $3 million with the understanding that this money will not go towards the parking garage until we've had a chance to see the comprehensive parking study and weigh in on what kind of transportation demand management measures should possibly accompany that. And I don't think that will hold up the timeline at all.
Chris, could you repeat that one more time for me so I can get it written down?
Yeah, we support the $3 million that's in the amendment, but not we do not support that money would go toward a parking structure until we've had a chance to see a comprehensive parking study and weigh in on the appropriate parking policy for the project.
Thank you, Chris. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second that.
Second by Margaret. Discussion. Chris, did you want to speak further to your motion?
I kind of already did. I think, yeah, I don't think that holds anything up. And I think it's if we're serious about making sure that projects align with transportation policy, then we ought to do that before the parking garage moves forward.
Thank you, Chris. Any further discussion? Seeing none, on the motion to support the approval of the $3 million.
Roll call, please.
Okay. Thank you, Alder Hankton-McKinney. We will do a roll call vote. On the motion to support approving the $3 million with the understanding that none of the money will go towards the parking garage until a parking study can be completed and the board can weigh in on the appropriate parking policy as Board Member McCahill indicated. All those, I'm sorry, Ann, please call the roll.
Alder Foster,
Aye.
Alder Harrington McKinney,
No.
Randy Udell,
No.
Chris McCahill,
Aye.
Tom Wilson,
Chair won't vote unless there's a tie or unless he changes the outcome.
Baltazar de Anda Santana,
No.
Margaret Bergamini,
Aye.
Badri Lankella.
No.
It would take 5 ayes in order to pass this. Because there are only 3, the chair's vote will not affect the outcome and the motion fails. Is there another motion?
I'd like to move that we go on record as to approve the language in the resolution, to move forward with the language in the resolution.
So the motion is to move forward with amending the 2021 adopted capital budget for the Community Development Authority as shown on the agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Randy. Any discussion? Alder Hankton-McKinney, did you want to speak further to your motion?
I think that we have discussed it in vital detail. I think that we are ready to move forward with that. With the consideration, I've heard the policy considerations, but at this point, I would like to move forward with the resolution as presented.
Okay, Ann, would you I'm sorry, is there any further discussion? Last call. Anne, would you please call the roll? And please save me to the end in case, or so I know if I'm going to affect the outcome.
Alder Foster?
No.
I figured that might happen.
Alder Harrington McKinney?
Yes.
Randy Udell?
Yes.
Chris McHale?
Abstain.
Baltazar de Santana?
Yes.
Margaret Bergamini?
Abstain.
Badri Lankella?
Yes.
By my count, that's 4 ayes and 1 no. That's still not the 5 needed to pass a motion, so the motion fails.
I have a question to the chair. Does that?
Yes, Alder.
My question to the chair is, since the original resolution and the amendment both failed, is the recommendation, what is the recommendation from this body? I mean, what will we send to the council?
Well, I see Alder Foster's hand is up. I'll let him, or it's down. Did you want to speak, Alder Foster?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, either someone puts a new motion forward that passes or there's no recommendation of the 2 outcomes.
That is my understanding as well, Alder Harrington McKinney, is just that there is no recommendation would be if we just move forward without passing something.
Does that need to go through with the outcome of the 2 votes that we just had? Is there a second motion that this body goes forward with no recommendation, or it's understood?
It could be just understood unless there is a desire by a board member to hold a vote. I think it's simply understood. Otherwise, we'll just sit here going in circles all night long.
Okay.
The results of both votes will stay with the record, of course.
Okay, thank you.
So absent a new motion, okay, giving folks a chance here. All right, absent a new motion, there is no recommendation on this item. So we will move on to our next item. Legistar 65238, our Department of Transportation Director's report from Tom Lynch.
Thank you. I'll be brief because I know that TIP and the FAIR items also will take some time. This was a product of some of the TPB board leadership. We thought that having a director's report may be similar to the Park Commissioner's report to the Park Commission would be beneficial. And so I've sought to do that with this. Highlights from the report include Sun Prairie's council voting to be part of our BRT Light, you might call it, and so that every other BRT bus would go to the Sun Prairie lot, which we view that as a success since we seek to have a transit system that serves the region. We had a couple of meetings with USDOT and Amtrak regarding service to Madison. It's in Amtrak's proposal, and the city in the past has been very much supportive of that. I do want to put a plug. We are wrapping up some of the details on the transportation demand management, which focuses on parking and shifting mode share. And if there was ever, those documents and efforts will be part of a joint planning commission TPPB meeting on May 13th. It's a kind of a workshop. Probably if there was ever an advertisement for how important this is, it was probably the last hour of discussion. So we really need to understand how parking affects transportation policy and modes. And so this effort, the Transportation Demand Management Ordinance, will seek to provide more definition, which will help policymakers and developers and everyone. Federal monies, there were several, with all of the funding proposals put forth through the presidential administration and the like, there were numerous requests from primarily Representative Pocan, who's been given the opportunity to suggest projects. Over the last 3 weeks, we've mostly put forth projects that this board has already seen and have been in the pipeline for several years. They need to be somewhat shovel ready. We put together, numerous proposals of different projects. Mark Pocan will move forward with the Atwood Avenue project as a possible fast act appropriations request, which that's a good project. It has it reduces motor vehicle capacity a little bit, adds a needed bike lane. So you could see why I was attracted to his office. The remainder is pretty straightforward. It might just be good to alert the board that there is a growing speeding problem or nuisance problem, cruising you might call it, on East Washington Avenue in downtown. And it really begins Thursday and Friday and Saturday. It's I live over a mile from East Washington and I can hear it from my home. So it is of concern to some of the districts there. And so traffic engineering is meeting with Madison Police Department, and we're looking at just different ways to reduce the unwanted aspects of cruising, such as the noise and the speed danger. And so that's really the highlights of this document. I guess I could accept questions if there are any.
Thank you, Tom. Any questions for Tom? Margaret, go ahead.
A quick question, Tom. Thanks for the news of Sun Prairie. Out of curiosity, and obviously we haven't finalized schedules. We're nowhere near that. But Sun Prairie's approval of, as you called it, BRT Light, is the spirit of that that they would also have a similar span of service and days of operation as the rest of the BRT system, or are they maybe more narrowly focusing on first shift workers?
Actually, I was going to answer it, but Justin just turned on his video. So Justin, why don't you go ahead and answer that?
Sure. Yeah, so basically the concept would be that instead of ending the BRT service at East Springs and East Wash and forcing other routes to transfer at that point that would go further out, those buses would still end their BRT service at that point, but would continue on in local service, just stopping at regular bus stops out to the new endpoints. This would not change the overall span of service for the BRT. So they would see where Sun Prairie currently pays for peak hour only service all the way from Sun Prairie to the square. They would instead be paying just for this extension from East Springs out to their park and ride, but do so all day. So they would get all day service and for about the same cost as what they currently pay.
So the intention would not be to have any kind of evening service or weekend service?
You would.
Yeah, it would be all day, 7 days a week, at least to their park and ride. And they've had discussions as to whether or not they would like another route that would continue on past that.
Okay.
So it represents, instead of employment peak hour service only for Sun Prairie, it really provides much more access. From 6 in the morning till 12 at night, a person from Sun Prairie could get to the University of Wisconsin. They have to, which is, that's what we want to do, is we want to provide access to all of Dane County.
All right. Thank you, Margaret. Thanks, Tom and Justin. Any further questions for Tom? Yes, this is something that we're just going to do every month. There's a place for Tom to let us know what's going on, kind of condense short updates that we've expressed a desire to hear. So we're going to continue with that unless the board decides that we don't want to. All right. If there are no further questions, then we will move on to our next item, Legistar 65239, Transportation Improvement Program, 2022-2027. Chris Pedikowski. Go, Chris.
Hi, everyone. Chris Pedikowski with City of Madison Engineering, and I'm going to be talking about the Transportation Improvement Program draft. Share my screen here. Everybody seeing the presentation? Yes, okay. So many of you have been through this presentation in previous years, or perhaps even just last week at TC. So what I'm going to be showing today is a draft tip for us for the years 22 through 27. Essentially what the tip is I go around to various committees and commissions and the public and propose a draft, schedule of projects that are in our major streets and ped bike budgets, and take comments on those. And ultimately that helps prepare us for our budget proposal to the mayor later this month. So I'll be talking about mostly the major projects and major programs, and have some information to follow up if you want to get into deeper details. So I'll just get started here. So how does the project get into the city's transportation budget? A number of reasons. Could be a safety issue, could be deteriorated pavement condition, bicycle improvements, a bridge or utility infrastructure condition, requests working with other municipalities, working with timely ability to get developer contributions. Excuse me one sec. Or just projects in accordance with our neighborhood plan. So a lot of different ways to get a project into the budget. And what I'll do is I'll kind of go around the city in a counterclockwise. Start with the center here. So in the downtown area, we have a few projects proposed. The East or West Washington Avenues being resurfaced this year from Broome to Bedford. We have a joint project with WISDOT on South Blair Street from the Blair and Willie intersection. I'm sorry, from the Willie and Wilson intersection to East Washington, and then another block down East Wash to Blount Street. We were awarded safety funds for the Blair John Nolan intersection, and working with WISDOT to get that built next year. Also in the works here are some projects on Wilson and Broome, East Wilson in 23 and 24, and then we applied for Transportation Alternative Program funds to start working on a bike boulevard on West Main Street, and proposing to begin construction there in 2024. So I will, as I'm going around the city, it's hard for me to see if people have questions. So either shout something out, or we can just do questions at the end too. John Nolan Drive project, we are proposing to apply for the Surface Transportation Block Grant funds, federal funds for this project. It's a very large construction project for us, which would reconstruct from North Shore down to Olin Avenue, possibly phased in a couple of years. This involves the reconstruction of the 6 bridges, so 3 northbound and 3 southbound bridges on the causeway, and also includes enhancements to the ped bike multi-use path and the shoreline in this area. And we're proposing that this would be one of our requests for federal funds this summer. So there's a couple things that you'll kind of hear a bunch throughout this program, either projects that have been awarded federal funds already, or ones that we propose to apply for them this summer. So the STBG federal funds are, the applications are due in June, and we'll also have another round of TAP ped bike funds due in probably like November-ish. So this one would be, we're proposing as one of our STBG requests. University Avenue, it was reconstruction from Sherwood Boulevard to University Bay Drive. This one has already been awarded the funds, well under design, and proposed to start construction next year. This includes reconstructing the pavement as well as a new ped and bike overpass over University Bay Drive for the campus drive path that currently exists in this area. Old Middleton Road and the underpass. So we propose to resurface Old Middleton Road from Capitol all the way to just past Eau Claire. As part of, not as part of this, but we're also working on another project with a new ped bike underpass underneath the railroad in this location. We're proposing this work all in 2022. So this underpass would be a replacement of an old ped bike underpass under the railroad that people use. Some people might not even know it's there, but there's a stairway in the Kanaki supermarket parking lot that goes down to this old stormwater culvert that the residents use quite a bit to get from one side of the tracks to the other. And we propose to replace that with a modern, ADA access underpass underneath the railroad there. Again, proposed in 2022. We're hopeful we can get that done next year. There is some TIF funding available potentially for this project, so I'd like to get that work done, coordinating with the railroad. Okay, this is a new project that we're starting to propose. Calling it the Old Sauk Path. It's an east-west path on the far west side of the city. To kind of orient yourself, here is the Beltline, and this east-west road is Old Sauk. Currently, you've seen in our TIP, not actual programmed, but contemplated an overpass in this area. Generally, we've looked on the south side of Old Sauk. But one thing we're looking at now is coordinating with our stormwater group, who has had extensive flooding issues in this area, and through their watershed studies have decided that they would be reconstructing the greenways through this area over a number of years. And the first part they're looking at next year is this east side here. This is High Point Road and Old Sauk. So they are looking at reconstructing their greenway. And as we look at that reconstruction, there is in the MPO bike plan, there is this planned path. So the idea would be that while we're in there reconstructing the greenway, we go ahead and build the paths along with it. So over a number of years, our stormwater group is going to be reconstructing these greenways on both sides of the Beltline. Again, starting with this East version. And so what we're proposing is to include the portion of this path that's in the Greenway with with our Bikeways Fund, and start looking at that as early as the next year in 2023. So it would coincide with the Greenway construction. In thinking about that, this path really starts to make a lot of sense if you can also include a new Beltline bridge over the Beltline that was contemplated also in what we call the Junction Ridge path just a bit south of here. And you can see that the path and the bridge system would connect a lot of home and residential areas on either side to a kind of a business and job area in the center here, which would create some great connections, and also would coincide with our Pleasant View Road project, which would have a north-south path component in it. So would be kind of a nice system. So this is one thing that interested in people's comments on as a new project. Again, we'd be looking at starting with a portion of the path and perhaps even proposing a Beltline bridge at the very end of the tip or horizon list, something of that nature. Okay, so moving further west, we have Pleasant View Road, which is a joint project with the City of Middleton. We'll be reconstructing from Highway 14 to Timberwolf Trail, which is just north of Old Sauk, and also including bike components with that where we're able. As I mentioned before, this can kind of tie into that Greenway system that I just showed here, and here's kind of the location of that potential bridge that we're contemplating putting in our tip. West Town Path is a east-west path that kind of goes along the Beltline. Just this last year, we built the Grand Canyon to Gammon Road, a portion of that, and we now have the underpass under Gammon Road. We are still missing the Gammon to High Point stretch, which we have design money for, but we do not right now. That construction is still on the horizon list. The path connection exists from High Point and over the Beltline over to Commerce Drive, and we were awarded TAP funds in the last cycle to connect that last piece of West Town Path to Junction Road and hook that up with the Ice Age Junction path. So that path was TAP fund awarded and proposed here in green. This route around Long Plaza and Watts would be proposed for construction in 2023. Also, a possible STVG federal fund request would be this piece of Mineral Point Road from the Beltline to High Point Road. Would be a pavement reconstruction, and then also implementing the north side ped and bike multi-use path that is kind of proposed in the BRT plan. Also, very likely to look at applying for HSIP funds for the High Point and Mineral Point intersection later this year to try to obtain some federal funds to help with that some intersection crashes we're getting at that intersection. So again, this would be a federal fund request for 2027. Moving a little more central now, Park Street, we have the concrete repairs southbound lanes that are under construction now from Vilas to Olin Avenue and from the railroad down to Badger. So that will kind of fulfill our needs for a good, hopefully 10, 12 years on those stretches of Park Street. Those are just concrete joint repairs. this stretch in the middle, Olin Avenue to the railroad, we still have programmed for reconstruction in 2026. That's a project that we hope to get the Wisconsin DOT to program, as it is Highway 151. So currently continuing to request that piece for construction. Also in this same area, we have the Cannonball Path extension, which currently stops at Fish Hatchery Road. We would propose to extend that along the north side of the railroad through the backside of Bowman Field and then across Winger Creek with a new bridge, and proposing that to be built next year with TIF funds. We're underway on the design of that, and looking at hopefully building it in 2022. If not, certainly bidding it in 2022. There's still some questions about how long the permit will take for us to get through the wetlands and over the creek, but it is our hope to build it next year. County AB is a WISTOT project where they will be rebuilding the interchange rebuilding the intersection of County AB with a new interchange here. So currently there's an at-grade intersection with Mill Pond Road and the Beltline, and AB in the Beltline, and those two at-grade intersections would be replaced with a frontage road system and a new interchange at AB. That is currently proposed to start construction next year, 2022. Moving further east now, we have the Autumn Ridge Path, which is a new path that we've been working on the design here for a couple of years, and it's currently kind of sitting on the horizon list, I believe. Proposing to put this in the STBG federal fund requests. We had applied for TAP funds in the past. The path was applied for in the past, and the project is a bit expensive for the TAP program. So we are proposing to put this in our STBG federal fund request, which has a little more capacity to take on a project like this. It would be a new path and a new overpass of Highway 30 from Ziegler Road to the High Stand Park area here. Atwood Avenue is a reconstruct project that we have planned from Fair Oaks to Cottage Grove Road. The design is essentially pretty much about 90% done, and just waiting federal funds. If they may implement or award funding to, would be kind of advanced and built in a time frame from 22 to 24 with those stimulus funds, and that's what we're hoping to do here with Atwood and Autumn Ridge Path, since those designs are a little further along. With the John Nolan Drive and Mineral Point projects, we were proposing kind of in the later years that would be just kind of using the regular amounts of STBG federal funds. So it's still a little bit determined, to be determined as far as what years we can get them, but that's kind of our proposal at this point. Okay, moving a little further north here, we have Troy Drive Bridge, and in the past we've proposed an underpass here, a ped bike underpass on the north side of the road to replace the old pedestrian culvert that exists, and we're trying to work with WISTOD now to change that to a full reconstruct of the bridge to include a span for the full right-of-way, which would allow us to build rebuild Troy Drive underneath with bike lanes and sidewalk on both sides. So that's an exciting project. We're hopeful to work with the railroad and get a WISTOT freight rail grant on this one. And right now we're showing it in 2024. I believe that if it does get funded, we might know potentially this year yet, and that could be advanced to 2023. Okay, so there's a lot of projects, kind of smaller type projects that aren't like major budget line items, and how we fund those are generally out of our program funds. So we've got a couple of program funds that I'm going to highlight here quickly. The Reconstruct Streets program, which we use to reconstruct streets, usually local streets in neighborhoods. These projects are, even though they're small, they're still pretty pricey. We can this year propose to reconstruct about 3 miles worth of streets on the list here. I won't go into the list in detail, but we can kind of talk about that later, or folks can contact me. The next program is called Pavement Management, and this is where we take we do a lot of efforts in some more lower cost pavement management strategies to really lengthen the lives of our streets. So in any given year, we could usually chip seal and crack seal anywhere between 50 and 100 miles. So those are you can tell obviously the reach here. If you go back to our reconstruct and we look at reconstructing 3 miles with this program, we can potentially treat up to 100 miles with this program. It's obviously very important for us to keep this up so that the projects don't get into the reconstruct category, and we can keep them keep the streets kind of held together so they don't need those expensive infrastructure reconstructions for quite some time. So we also do patching with this program, where we can just patch like little 100-foot stretches of streets to kind of get at some of the worst areas. We also resurface, just do full width mill and overlay with this program as well, and get propose about 6.2 miles next year with these a few projects that are listed. A bikeways program is another important program in our ped bike budget, where generally we've used this to resurface paths. In the last, I'd say 5 to 10 years, we've been adding small new paths to this program, as well as we've been kind of catching up with some of our resurfacing. We do have a few stretches in these areas, Quanah Park, Sherrill Park, etc., that we would like to resurface next year. And then we've got a couple of kind of standalone projects that we propose to include as well, with the Modana cycle track along the golf course. I mentioned before that Wexford Greenway, or Old Sauk Path, and also potentially some future projects with either or candidates for the list would be Goodman Park, Tantra Drive, Daw Street, and Glenwood Park connections. I would show that, or want to point out that what we're proposing to do is increase the program funds to start to keep up with these greenway projects. And generally, as I was looking at the stormwater group's plans, almost always in these greenways, there's also some sort of path function programmed by our MPO bike plans. So as they are kind of going through their watershed studies and identifying their projects, I'm proposing that we increase the amount in our bikeways program to keep up with them and build those paths along with the greenways. Okay, sidewalk program. I think we're almost through here, so I'll get a couple more slides. Sidewalk program next year, we have District 5 planned, and the year after that, 12 and 18. this year we're in districts 13 and 14. This is where we have ordered repairs for areas of our sidewalk that are either cracked, back pitched, not draining well, heaved. We do those repairs to kind of keep up with our sidewalk program and liability issues. Generally, we can get through the city in about 10 years. So we can either 1 to 2 to 3, sometimes all their districts a year. And these are the ones proposed to keep up with that schedule. Also, along with the sidewalk program, we similar to bikeways, we do try to program a few new sidewalk connections, and we've got a pretty healthy wish list here that we've are proposing to work on it both with 2021 funds and propose to keep that up in 2022. These are all projects generally that have been contemplated before, but got held up due to staffing issues and COVID issues. So proposing to, keep up with that in the sidewalk program and actually get a good healthy start on it this summer. Okay, lastly, just a kind of state of condition of where our streets are at. We rate our streets every 2 years. So essentially what that means is we go around half the city each year and take a look at the street condition. And a condition of level 10 is like a new street, perfect pavement. Down to 3 is about the worst usually you'll see in the city. We have goals to try to keep a certain number of miles at or below a condition state 5. For local streets, we have a goal of 30% lower. We've been meeting that goal for the last few years now and continuing to trend well there, and currently at 23%. For collector streets, we have a goal, a little bit a smaller goal. Is this affects more people, so we want to keep that percentage even lower. Our goal is at 20% to have the percent of miles at or below condition 5. We're just we're a little bit above that goal right now at 22.6%. And then arterial streets, we have a goal of 15% to try to keep those at or below condition state 5. And as you can see, we've been hovering above that goal quite a bit for the last few years, more or less keeping up with the each year as the new 6s become 5s. We've been able to keep up, but having a hard time putting a big dent in those. And this is kind of hard to see. It takes a few years to fully realize by the time it gets rated and whatnot. But we're hoping that with the increased emphasis in the last year or two, and continuing that in the future with our pavement management system, that we can get this goal back down and get this number more closer to 15%. For paths, we're doing a bit better. We try to look at trying to get all of the miles at or below 5 repaired, and we are down to 6.8% as of last fall. And I think with the projects that we have programmed for bikeways resurfacing this year and next, that currently hits at all the ratings of 5 in the city. However, Mother Nature can create a few new number 5s for us, so we'll continue to rate those and keep up with that. But currently looking pretty good, I think, for our paths. So how to get info? We have our website. Each project has a website. I have my phone number and email here as well, and looking to get input on the program. And this is a lot to digest. And if folks want to take some time and get back to us later, that's fine. Ultimately, this helps us as I mentioned, work on our budget requests. So any comments or project suggestions are very helpful. It's all I had for presentation.
Thank you, Chris. Alder Foster, you're up first.
Thanks, Chris. Just curious about sort of the interplay with this presentation and the kind of intro presentation that you gave us, or maybe a month or so ago, about sort of rethinking a little bit around the kind of prioritization process and how how projects get scheduled. Do you have any update on that work, or even just an update in terms of like timeline of kind of where things are at with that?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I forgot to mention, so we're still working through that. I have a few more committees to get their input from, and then we got to a kind of a point where I think we've got a lot of good feedback, and as I mentioned, there's a couple more committees to go to. I would propose, I think that the months of January to April, as we're kind of like crunching to get all our projects out, is difficult to add a lot more stuff in. So we got to a point where we had some good feedback on that process. I expect to work on that more here in the summer, and a couple of the things we've learned, I think, is that there's not probably a system that works, one system for all kind of thing. It might be a kind of a combination of systems for programs versus projects. Also looking at trying to look at impact more. For instance, one of the items we're working on with the Department of Civil Rights is the equity component, and maybe perhaps just having a project located in an NRT area or an area of color might not cut to the real point there, and look at more of the impact of the project itself on the group. So looking at equity questions. But those are still things we certainly, find important and will continue to keep working on. But I don't really have other than the draft scores that I kind of came up with earlier. That's kind of still where we're sitting.
That sounds good. Definitely looking forward to continuing that conversation, that work. I think it'll be really important, especially in terms of how we integrate Vision Zero sort of into that, right? And how much weight sort of safety and improvements in safety.
Yeah, safety is another one. Yes, thank you.
Yeah. I guess the one reaction I would just share with you from this presentation is just in those sort of last few slides around pavement quality and for local collector and arterial. And obviously we have different goals, based on those three. Looks like we're doing pretty good on the local, kind of behind where we'd like to be on the arterial. Obviously the cost for reconstruction of the arterials is much, much higher than what it would be for a local project. But I think that's one area I would say, even separately from the updates to the prioritization program, is those arterials are probably also the places where we have the biggest opportunity to improve safety. I think, given what we've seen on the high injury network, that's where we have a lot of our kind of issues with traffic violence, and also are often the places where we have some of our biggest pedestrian and bike gaps in terms of crossing supports and just separated facilities. So I guess in general, I think from my experience and seeing some of the projects that are getting the local streets that are getting reconstructed in my district, if those needed to wait a little bit longer in order to move ahead with some of the kind of more critical arterial projects, I think that's perhaps a general direction that I would be supportive of. Thanks for your work in the presentation.
Just taking notes, so if people see me looking down.
Thank you, Alder Foster. Any further questions for Chris? All right, thanks again, Chris. Yeah, I agree with Alder Foster. That was very outstanding and informative, so thank you. Let's see. All right, seeing no hands up, we will then move on to our final item for the evening, Registrar 65244, our Metro Fare study. So Justin, you can go ahead and you're ready.
Good evening, everyone. So a couple things before I jump in. First, I just want to make clear, I'm not asking you to vote on anything today or any specific. I'm really just presenting this as a initial presentation to kind of outline the work that we've been doing, what our initial recommendations are. But we will be going through a public process after this meeting to gain public feedback and then come back to you for some sort of policy direction around this. And the second apology I'll make is that there's a lot here. It's very dense. And I imagine no matter the amount of time that I spend going through it, there will probably be lots more to discuss and there will be things I miss. So again, feel free to ask questions, obviously, after I go through this, but certainly afterwards, if you identify additional questions, feel free to email me or reach out for a meeting or however you'd like to discuss them. So first, just kind of why are we looking at this? One, I think there's pretty broad understanding that the customer convenience that exists in our fare collection system right now is not great, and that there's a lot we can do to modernize that. We hear that often from our riders, and so we do want to go down a path that creates a better experience for our customers. We spend quite a bit of money collecting fares, and so anything we can do to minimize either the dollars or the time we spend in our administration of fare collection is helpful. And this is all important because the equipment that we currently use does not have an unlimited lifespan. We purchased the current equipment in 2014. It generally has a 10 to 15 year lifespan. And so, here in a couple of years, we will be coming up on the end of life of that equipment. And it takes a long time to implement a new system and go through RFPs and all of that. And so we want to make sure that we're ready and we aren't scrambling in a position where our fare collection equipment is failing and we don't have a robust plan for how to move forward from there. So as I kind of mentioned, I'm presenting initially to you today. We'll have some sort of public meeting after this, probably in a month or so, probably in June. We'll come back to you for some direction based on the public feedback on that. From there, we'll design and release an RFP for the equipment, and then we'll move forward with implementation. So I would expect it to take, probably be early next year before we have a vendor on board, and that the rollout of that system will likely take a couple years, and ultimately, I think probably would go fully live in 2024 with the BRT line. So first, I want to touch a little bit on the fare-free discussion. That was kind of the first thing we looked at. I know that there's been a lot of talk of that in the community, and I'm sure you'll hear from some folks comment at the end, because it has gotten a lot of attention recently. The biggest city to date in the United States that uses a fare-free system is Chapel Hill, North Carolina. They've been doing this for about 15 years. Their system was generating about 8% of its revenue from fares, and about 80% of their ridership was coming from the University of North Carolina. And so they made this decision in conjunction with the university to go to a fare-free system where the university just pays them the amount that the fares would have been. All intents and purposes, it seems that is going fairly well. but they do have they have been studying resuming fare collection, mainly because they're kind of in a bind on how to expand service to meet increasing need, because that payment from the university is not increasing necessarily with ridership. In addition, Kansas City has made a broad policy goal of going fare free for their system. To date, their city council has directed staff to develop a plan to do so, but they have not finalized that plan, nor have they tried to implement it yet. Europe has had more examples, especially recently, primarily in Tallinn, Estonia, but there's a few other examples that have done so and continue to do so in going fare free. The results generally been mixed. So the typical, and obviously there's a lot more to dive into here, but I'll give you kind of a broad brush review of our technical review. So it certainly does reduce barriers to people using the system. It's free, so you don't have to, not only do you not have to pay, but you don't have to go get a fare card or anything like that. It does increase ridership. Many systems saw about a 30% increase. That range was 10 to 50%, but on average it was around 30. It would reduce administrative costs in terms of we don't have to buy a fare collection system, we don't have to manage a pass program, all of that. Challenges, obviously, loss of operating revenue. I'll talk a little bit more specifically what that means for us. But some of the ones that maybe weren't quite as obvious, the ridership gain in many of these systems, particularly some of the research that's been done around some of the systems in Europe, is primarily come from people that would have biked or walked, and that they really did not see their vehicular mode share, single occupant vehicles go down a whole lot much at all. And I think the speculation in some of those reports is that that's primarily because the cost of a transit fare, $2, is not really that big of a deal compared to the cost of driving in terms of gas and maintenance and parking and all of that. And so the proportionality of cost difference between a $2 transit ride versus a $12 drive is not, those economics don't change between a $12 drive and a $0 transit trip all that much. The other thing is, because the ridership did go up, that means often you need more service to accommodate those additional people. And so there's not, and whether or not that's a big deal depends on whether or not you actually have capacity to give. If your buses are full, it means you need to add more buses, which actually increases your cost even more. Unfortunately, it is fairly strongly correlated with an increased level of security complaints. And that's because there's a lot more people that are using the bus that maybe wouldn't be using the bus if it weren't free. And so unfortunately, the research did show in many of these systems that they did have a strong increase in number of complaints around security issues. So for us in Madison specifically, what does this mean? So our ridership is strong, or was pre-pandemic, and we expect it to come back to the point where our fare revenue makes up about a quarter of our budget, which is a much larger percentage than many of the other systems had when they implemented this. We do have capacity issues already. So introducing even a 10% increase in ridership would mean we need to add more service, which again adds even more cost. We do have some opportunities to offset some of those the revenue losses. So it's theoretical that our past programs with UW, like in Chapel Hill, and some of our other partnerships could go to a lump sum model where they just pay a lump sum rather than a per ride. This is not something that we've discussed with them. This is not something that they've committed to by any stretch. But that would recoup about half of our fare revenue. So we would still lose half. We would reduce our cost of collection by about $500,000 a year. But all that adds up to a net gap between 7.5 million, all the way up to maybe over 17 million, depending on how much additional service we need to add. Because that's the real wild card there. We don't know exactly how much it would increase ridership, and therefore we don't know exactly how much service we need to add. And we have a small case study in Fare Free by what we did last spring and summer. We were fare free from March through August of last year. And we did have even though our ridership was down overall, we did have a pretty large increase in the number of customer complaints regarding security issues on the buses and at the transfer points. It's obviously a blip, and it didn't correspond with other efforts that we may have taken to try to mitigate that. But it did exist, and it was real, and it was a concern of our riders. So for all these reasons, staff is not recommending that we move in a fare-free direction, that we focus on trying to find other methods to reduce barriers to service, using the service. And all that's predicated on, if we were to find additional funding sources, we feel that rather than spending it on reducing fares, it would be best to spend it on increasing service and providing more access to more people and making transit a viable option for more people than it is today. So from there, we started to look at what the fare system would actually be. So this is, again, fairly broad strokes, and I'm happy to entertain questions to dig into more details. But in general, there are three types of fare systems. One is a traditional fare box like we use today, the machine at the front of the bus. One is an account-based system where you have a transit account where you load a dollar amount value onto it, and it's almost like a gift card type of thing where you have an account in the cloud that's tied to your card or your phone or whatever. It has a balance on it, and that balance is deducted as you use it, as you use transit. And then proof of payment, which I'll talk about a little bit more. So the traditional fare box, it handles everything in one device, cash and passes. It allows cash on the bus. That cash collection does slow the bus down to some extent. Passes generally can't be purchased on the bus. They need to be pre-purchased at a retailer or our customer service window. There are some capabilities for doing tap cards or mobile payments with this system. There are some limitations. It's very locked into their own ecosystem of this manufacturer. And so with this system kind of nearing the end of its life, it's a little difficult to go down that path. Frankly, the machines fail often, and they're expensive to repair, and we get a lot of customer service complaints around the fare collection equipment. And most important, this really won't work on our bus rapid transit line because with the bus rapid transit, we'll be loading at all the doors, including on a 60-foot bus, the middle and rear doors. And we really don't want to have the bus moving while people are paying their fare. And so in that situation, they'd be able to board at the rear door. They have to walk all the way to the front to the fare box, pay their fare, and then go all the way back to the back, which would end up significantly delaying the service. And so for that reason, it's almost never done on a BRT system. The one exception is Cleveland. Their Healthline system originally did not have this. However, I'll talk a little bit more about proof of payment in a minute, and I'll explain this particular case study for you when we get to that point. So before I do that, though, I want to dig a little bit more on the account-based system. So again, you have a card or a phone or whatever that is linked to an account. That account has a value dollar amount in it. You then get on the bus, you tap your card or swipe your phone at this reader. It's a much smaller device, and you sit down. The big thing is that it does speed up the boarding times because you don't have to, or because you can have these smaller devices at all 3 doors, and that registration, that tap is very quick. But the main thing is that cash collection, there's no method for cash collection on the bus. And so there's a lot of mitigations that I'll explore for that here in a minute. So proof of payment, this is not really realistic for our entire system, and really only for the BRT, primarily because users basically just pay their fare at the station. When the bus comes up, they just get in and take a seat, and they don't have to show any tickets at the time. So to combat that, we would send a fare inspector, individuals that we hire to roam the system at random, checking people's tickets to make sure that they pay. That fare inspection takes quite a bit of labor and cost, so it would actually increase our cost of collection by anywhere like almost up to $1 million potentially. But it does produce the fastest boarding process of any of these. The other thing that the fare inspectors that's a concern is that it is prone to profiling complaints and concerns. This has been shown in other cities that I don't have good data on how many complaints have been found to be true, but there certainly is a big uptick in complaints and concerns about profiling because these folks, these fare inspectors, get on the bus and start asking people for tickets. They have to be very, very careful to ask everyone on the bus, and in some cases, if they aren't, and they start asking certain individuals, that becomes obviously a very big problem. The other issue is that it does require ticket equipment at every one of the stops, at every BRT station. So that's another reason why it can't really be done on local buses. These machines can be quite expensive and prone to the same maintenance issues that those traditional fare boxes have. The other thing that's specific to our situation here in Madison is that our University Pass program is billed per ride, and pretty much all of our other pass programs. These systems, unless a passenger taps their card at the station before they board the bus, we will likely never register their ride, which will mean that the way that we bill our partners could result in a pretty big reduction in our fare revenue from them. And that's something that's more unique to us. And then if we went down this route, we would still use the fare boxes on the local buses that we have today. So to the point of Cleveland's example, Cleveland has a transit police force. Specifically, they have police officers that are assigned to the transit agency. And they did their fare collection using those police officers. They lost a court case. It was a state case in the state of Ohio that said using a police officer to do these fare inspections is an illegal search and seizure. That you cannot, there's no probable cause to ask these people for their ticket for a police officer. And so they, because of that, most cities have gone to a more civilian ticket fare inspection, more like our parking attendants, our parking enforcement. But Cleveland was not able to do that. And so they do now force everyone to get on the back door, walk all the way to the front of the fare box, and then go back and sit down, which does slow things dramatically and noticeably. I've ridden that system both before and after they made that change, and it was a pretty big change. So essentially what we are recommending is that we implement an account-based system that can be used across the entire metro system. So on all of our local routes and our BRT routes, we've got these fare validators at the doors that people can use to tap their cards. We need to mitigate the cash collection issue, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But this does allow us to use a uniform system across all of our fleet. We don't have one type of fare collection for BRT and another type of fare collection for the local routes. Allows all-door boarding on all the routes, which will help speed those other routes up too. And will allow us to implement a few new techniques that I'll talk about here in a minute. So cash collection. So again, with these fare validator devices, they don't have the ability to accept cash. And so in order to continue to accept cash on board the bus, we need to have a separate piece of equipment. And that obviously, it's costly to maintain that second piece of equipment. It's also costly to empty those boxes every night and send an armored truck to pick them up. And it slows down the bus as people are feeding cash in. Currently, less than 10% of our riders use cash on board, which is small overall, but certainly those folks that do continue to use cash are doing so for a reason. The account-based collection system really requires, in order to get the full benefits of that system, you need to be able to load cash into your account rather than just pay cash on the bus. And so in order to unlock a lot of these techniques that I'll talk about later, we really need to try to get folks to use this account rather than just paying cash on the bus. But in many cases, there are people who have no other option. If they don't have a mobile phone with credit cards, if they don't have access to a retail location, various other things. And that's why this is a very critical equity issue that we need to address and solve for before we make any changes on this front. So I'll go through a couple ways that we can mitigate cash on board. So first, what we can do is allow people to, if they have an account-based system, that account can technically go negative. So that if they have their account, they can pay for their ride after that trip at some point down the road when they have access to a retail location or whatever location they need to load cash on their card. But this only works when the card itself has value. This doesn't work when you can just let your account go negative and then throw your card away and get a new card, because obviously people would just continue to do so. The other thing that we can do is help lessen the burden of the fare amount for some who would qualify. So we currently have a very limited half fare program that rolled out, I think, in the last year or two. But it's limited in the number of passes that we can actually sell based on what the budget is provided. And so we could potentially look into expanding that half fare program to make it anyone who is eligible for it and not put any sort of caps on the system. And that would have some financial incentive for the hassle of reloading your card, not on the bus. And encourage protecting those fare cards because you would need to register yourself to that account. And in order to get that half fare, you need to maintain that card. And so that would allow you to have an incentive to keep and maintain that one account and not just dispose of it. So essentially the way this would work in combination, these two, is that if you would qualify for the low income program, you could register for this half fare program. You would get a tap card that would be linked to your account. And you could reload your account with cash in various places that I'll talk about in a minute. And you could even let that card account go negative. But if that negative account got to a certain point and you decide to just throw that card away and get a new one, you would no longer be using the half fare program. You would be paying full price from then on because you can't register for 2 half fare cards under your one individual. The other thing we can do is create a retail network. We have a small retail network right now, but there are methods out there using gift card networks that would allow people to buy new cards at Walgreens, CVS, various other retailers, basically any retailer that wanted to participate. You can buy new cards like you would a gift card, but you can also reload your existing account with cash. Their point of sale system is linked in to where you can say, here's my card, here's $5, I want to let them on, and then they can just scan your card, take the $5 and it loads onto your account. Some of the challenges, retailers aren't everywhere, and the store hours are limiting. And they do charge a commission, typically 5 to 10%, but in the scheme of the cost of our cash collection outside of this, this is actually a pretty good deal because we spend almost as much collecting cash on board as we receive. Another thing we can do is implement kiosks, fare collection, these ticket vending machines where you can load cash in and reload your account. Same issues as they would have had on a few slides ago. They're expensive, they have maintenance challenges, but they are available 24/7, which is one of the biggest benefits of these. Another anecdote, of all the BRT systems operators that I've talked to, number one customer complaint are these machines because they fail often. One particular example was from Grand Rapids, where they initially on their first BRT, they oriented all of these to face the street and then realized in the first snowfall that the snow plows threw all the snow right into the face of these machines and basically disabled half of them in the very first snowfall. Like $10 million worth of fare collection equipment. So it's a big challenge. I'm sorry, $5 million, not 10. That's a lot. We could continue to collect cash on bus. It would slow the bus and reduce the benefits of the account-based system, but it certainly is possible. The main burden would be to maintain the cash collection equipment, and the users using cash likely wouldn't accrue the benefits of a fare collection, of an account-based system like a half fare program or things like that. So in all, our recommendation is to create this half fare program with allow negative balances and retail network. Continue to cash on board the buses for now, potentially phase out as we roll out BRT. And we've given people an opportunity to start adopting this account-based system. But otherwise, we would not collect cash on BRT because there would not be an effective method to do that, short of putting a kiosk at every single station. And again, I'll clarify, no cash on board BRT. You can still use cash at a retailer or a kiosk to reload your account, just not pay on board. So a few other things that the account-based fare collection system unlocks for us that I think could have other equity benefits. One, and I think probably the most important, is fare capping. So right now, you buy, if you want to pass a monthly, daily, whatever pass, you have to shell out that entire amount upfront. So I believe, I can't remember exactly what our monthly pass is, $80 some, I think. And if you want the benefits of that monthly pass, you have to pay that amount upfront at the beginning of the month. And that's a big barrier for a lot of people. And so a lot of people actually end up spending a lot more money, potentially over $100 a month on transit, just because they couldn't afford that $80 at the beginning of the month. And so fare capping allows you to basically earn towards your cap, earn towards your pass. So you just pay your $2 per ride, but then when you hit that cap, every ride from there on is free. So essentially, nobody ends up paying more than what the pass rate would have been. You can also structure these to be daily, weekly, or monthly. One benefit of a weekly cap, though, is that often people that are going to hit the cap hit it on Friday, and then rides are free over the weekend, which is when we typically have a little more capacity. So, which is, I think, good for us as a system. We don't then have to sell passes anymore. All people have to do is load dollars on their account, and that's it. You just tap until you hit the cap, and then you're done paying for that period. So we don't have to have a big distribution network, and people have to decide, oh, I don't want a day pass or a monthly pass or what. There's no decision point there. They can just put money on their account. One slight downside is that there is no sunk cost mentality. Like if there is some incentivization of if you shell out $80 at the beginning of the month, you're going to use transit that month. Whereas that doesn't quite exist here because you're not shelling out that amount of money at the beginning. And because people are no longer paying $100 when they should have only spent $80, there is a slight reduction in revenue, but that revenue reduction is basically on the backs of those who could least afford it. And so this is not revenue that I think we deserve anyway, if that makes sense. Mobile payments, another thing that getting a lot of attention among heavy users so far in major cities. This is not getting a lot of use. It's a lot more common amongst the casual users and the visitors. But it's still something that we think is important. We need to explore. And there's two main variables here that I want to talk about, just so you can get a context of mobile payments. So first is account integration. Whether or not your phone is attached to your account for fare capping purposes and all of that. So one way to do it is just to treat it as an open payment system where it's not actually attached to your account. You can just use Apple Pay or Google Wallet and just pay $2 to tap your phone, pay $2. You don't have to install any new apps. You don't have to purchase passes, any of that. It's just truly the casual user who just wants to open up their phone and tap and go without having to install anything or deal with anything. The other is a closed system where your phone emulates a tap card so that you can use it in much the way you would a tap card. And that way you can accrue all those account-based fare collection system benefits, but it does require you to install a new app and add your payment info and all of that. And then how it's actually validated, there's three different methods here. One, some apps show an image on your phone that you just show to the driver, and that driver hits a button that says you're good. That won't work for BRT, and it only works at the front door for local routes. Another that a lot have used is barcode validation, where you get a barcode on your screen, and you run that screen of your phone under the reader, and it scans that just like a tap card. But those readers, they have not been able to get that figured out. It takes a while. You kind of hunt and peck with your phone to try to find the right angle to try to get that barcode to read. And it generally has not uniformly worked well. And it often extends the boarding process rather than shortens it. And then near field communication validation. That's a chip that's on many phones that allows your phone to truly emulate a tap card and do everything. Basically, as far as the reader is concerned, your phone is a tap card. But there are lower end phones and older phones that don't have this capability. And so this would not be available to everyone's smartphone. A few other things that we'd like to do is integrate existing IDs as tap cards, university IDs, student IDs, other things, so that people don't have to carry around multiple cards. Also would allow our past partners like UW to manage their own accounts. They would have a portal they can log in and see all 20,000 people that they're sponsoring and turn on and off those accounts at their leisure. still continue to offer single-use cards for social services. That we can issue paper cards that have these tap card functionality, although they're relatively expensive for the media itself, and so we would try to minimize their use to the extent possible, and not necessarily sell those to the public. Just provide them to social service organizations. We can eliminate transfer slips by opening up a transfer period. So once you tap your card once, every tap within a 2-hour period from then on there's no additional charge. So you can make all your transfers and you don't have to worry about transfer slips or anything like that. Right now, paratransit service. So that's for our folks with disabilities. That is only currently cash is the only option there, and allowing this, we could open up other methods of payment for those on paratransit. And we could also do, with these same readers, do contactless credit cards, the ones with the tap chip in those. Much like Apple Pay, you could just tap your card on there and just pay $2 and get a ride without linking into an account. So this is a lot. But this is essentially what we're recommending: going to an account-based system where we have tap readers at all the doors on all buses, BRT and local. Implementing a half-fare program for all those who qualify as low income, and allowing those to go negative as long as they register that account under a name. Establishing a retail network to reload those accounts. Perhaps putting in kiosks in key strategic locations, but not necessarily everywhere. Continue to use cash on board for local only for now, but not implement it with BRT, and with the goal of phasing it out as the adoption of this account-based system takes off. Implement weekly and daily fare capping to make sure that people don't have to pay for passes up front. Implement mobile payments, where we do a custom app that has the card emulation. So again, that will only apply for phones that have that capability. So other phones would not have this ability. Integrate with the ID cards, 2-hour transfer periods, paper cards, paratransit, and then the contactless credit cards for a non-account-based payment. So from here, we're working. We've got a more detailed memo than this, but we wanted to preview all this for you. We're in the process of finalizing that, and we'll share that with you. I wanted to run this all by you to have a chance to any comments you have, so that we could incorporate those comments into that report. We've had various other integrations talked about, potentially with bike share, parking, Zipcar. That might make sense with this account-based system. We have not explored that yet to date, but would welcome your feedback on whether we should. And then just a couple process questions around, is implementing this policy a bit of splitting hairs, but is it a public meeting that we hold separate from a TPP meeting, or is it a public hearing that we hold at a TPP meeting? And then what the role is of TPPB versus TC for the final policy direction, and then ultimately the final implementation. So again, lots there, but I would be happy to answer any questions.
All right, thanks, Justin. We have a couple of registrants for public comment, so we'll go to them next. Our first registrant is Bob Schaefer, 6 Cottonwood Circle, Madison, Wisconsin, neither in support nor opposition, wishing to speak. Bob, I can see that you're still with us. You've got 3 minutes, and you may begin when you're ready.
Right, yeah, I had another meeting that I was at, so I got registered a couple of times on there. One of the things that I want to bring to the attention is that lately we've talked about the ridership and how it's been increasing. Well, in reality, it has not been increasing. Last year, in 2019, it was the second worst of the last 10 years. But that one of the other things that we failed to do is we've failed to look at the available ridership. So that if we just use Madison population, that instead of having the 12,856,541 total ridership in 2019, it ought to have been 21,137,952. So that we need to take into consideration what our available riders are. That one of the other things you talked about was getting new equipment, and that what I did is I studied the routes, and for instance, Route 48 has only 27 daily average boardings. Now, you don't need a big bus for that because not all of those people are going to board at the same time. That when we look at the cost of the ridership, and when you look at the no fare ridership, that what it means is that everybody that's riding the bus doesn't pay anything, but that the people who don't ride the bus, and especially if they're automobile and have to pay the $40 a year tax on vehicle tax, that's where you're getting your support from. That when you look at the annual report for 2019, that the only amount that was fixed passenger revenue was only about 1/4 of the actual total operating cost. And when you look at the revenue per hour revenue hour route by route, it's only 45 cents. If you look at the annual ridership trips revenue mile per route, that there's only 0.4. And so that when we look at our bang for the buck here, so to say, that we need to take into consideration some of these factors, and that they don't look all that great. So that we need to use data in order to make some of the decisions, and that I submitted to the committee.
Mr. Schaefer, if you could wrap up quickly.
Right. Anyhow, you need to look at the data.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions for the speaker? All right. Our next speaker is John Becker, Madison, Wisconsin. I'm not sure if he's in support or opposition, wishing to speak. I think in opposition, but I'll let him speak for. Go ahead, John.
Good evening. This is John Becker. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, members. I'm talking tonight because I oppose the transit staff taking a position on this before there's been adequate study of fare-free transit. We started advocating for this 12 years ago, following the revelation from climate work groups at the county level that transportation sector was emerging as a very important and consequential part of the emissions. It's now #1 in the United States. And the solution that seemed one of the potential solutions, at least, was to go to fare-free transit. Of course, our mutual goal is to increase ridership. So we've been in touch with people all over the world, including cities that are just adopting fare-free transit, some on pilot basis. We also have been in touch with places like LA and Boston, where they're actually doing feasibility studies now. We've been in touch with the National Research Institute that has started to scope the bounds for a 360-degree cost-benefit analyses of fare-free transit's benefits. We've been in touch with European folks who have done studies across the world on fare-free transit, and who are now doing studies on driver satisfaction with fare-free transit, including security, which I think you'll find in most cities, none of them have closed down a fare-free transit system in Europe, and they're handling their security just fine. So there are lessons to be learned. There are different ways to fund this, but it all adds up to being much easier than the very complex systems that Justin has been presenting tonight at great length. They kind of skipped over the benefits of fare-free transit and a lot of other information about fare-free transit that we have gathered. And that's a problem. I think it's fine for staff to pull together information, present it to you, and have a public process. But I've been through this before at the county where we wanted a air resources emissions study done. And I did the RFP casually for finding an expert, talking to people at the UW and in the city staff and county staff. We located that. I wrote up the scope of work. We spent a year waiting for county's permission to proceed. We lost their main researcher, who was a postdoc person. We lost our liaison to the University of Minnesota, which is where we were referred. And we ended up with a much poorer study and a lot more staff time. So we're asking to help staff fill out what they missed in the fare free transit realm as far as benefits. We know there are some downsides, truly. We do not deny there were problems during the summer with perceived increase in incidents. But remember, there was very few riders, and the same people who were causing incidents before probably stood out. This is just a basic fact of research, which I am trained in. So we would like the chance for us to make a presentation by staff to feed into that doesn't bias the public immediately from the get-go against fare-free transit, which is what happened tonight. You're being fed a very little and very full of omissions.
John, if you could try to wrap up your comments briefly or quickly.
So I ask you to direct staff to withdraw their recommendation and gather the facts that are necessary for the public and you to make a really good decision.
Thank you, John. Are there any questions for the speaker? Seeing none, questions for staff? Chris, go ahead.
Thanks. Just in response to the last registrant's question, Justin, could you speak briefly on, clearly you've done a lot of research on various options. What was behind staff's decision not to do a more formal study on fare-free transit or take up some offers for help?
So we did. That's part of that report that I was mentioning that we did. We expanded the scope a little bit to examine not just fare free, but look at it comprehensively against other fare collection options. There is, an analysis done of that fare free transit in that report. Again, I'm just in the interest of if I presented everything that was in that report, we'd probably be here for about 4 more hours, but I wanted to preview some of this for you before this report came out to make sure that I got any feedback incorporated.
Supplementing Justin's point is that the report is technically in draft form, but I think it is the intent to allow policymakers to see it and comment on it. Right now, it's being done in conjunction with the finance department. So it's in draft form. I suspect within maybe a month or 6 weeks, it could be in a final form.
Thanks.
Thanks, Tom. Alder Foster, go ahead.
Thanks, Justin, for the early preview on this. I guess thinking about the sort of interest around the fare-free question, I think as you're working to prepare that kind of more final, more detailed analysis, and it's probably already structured this way. I mean, it kind of was in the presentation, but I think really sort of separating out the question of fare-free versus anything else sort of first, rather than like thinking of it as like one of 4 options or something like that would probably be helpful to really kind of comprehensively answer that question. I think would be helpful. I don't know if John and others that he's been working with have reached out to you, but certainly as you're working on that sort of final analysis, if there's an opportunity to make sure that they're heard and any additional info that they could bring to the analysis, that would be great to have that incorporated in so that everyone's feeling like their voices were heard. There certainly seem to be a lot of benefits associated with it. probably the biggest barrier, at least as was presented tonight, is really seems to be around the cost component. And in some of the kind of initial research that I did, it looks like most locations that have gone this route they have different ways of getting their revenue to not have to rely on the fare box. So I don't know if you have anything else to share tonight on that side, or maybe that will just come with the sort of more in-depth report. But to me, that really seems to be at the crux of it. You know, based on what I'm understanding right now, the biggest obstacles I see with transit in Madison, what we're trying to accomplish is we're trying to grow our system and provide more service. You know, thinking about the transit redesign work that's underway right now. I mean, we as a policy and planning board are going to be faced with really hard choices about, you know, where are we going to provide service to? And undoubtedly, there are going to be places that we'd like to provide service that we can't because we don't have the money. So in thinking about that, I think it just really has to be clearly articulated what fare free would represent in that space in terms of amount of service that we could provide. I mean, you mentioned it sort of briefly tonight, but I think that really just deserves to be fleshed out, because at this moment in time, for me, it seems like our biggest priorities are expanding our service, expanding how well transit can work for more people. And it's, as you mentioned, we already have pretty strong ridership. So getting more ridership on our existing routes is probably not our key goal with it. To answer your other question towards the end around the integration question, I definitely would like to see some more info on that side of things. Not even so much in terms of like convenience for customers, but really as we're trying to really change how people are thinking about transportation and really understanding the costs involved and the different options. I think there's a lot of value in just having a sort of city transportation account that they're loading. And, you know, if they swipe and pay $2 for a bus ride versus swipe and pay $8 for parking, I think there's a lot of benefit in that side of things to really help people understand the differences in cost associated with those transportation choices. And if we could fold bike share into there, great as well. But I think particularly parking and transit seem to be, if we could find a way to integrate those, I think that would be really great. And I think that's all I had. But thanks for this, for all the work on it. I think this was really helpful to get sort of an early view, and really looking forward to that more in-depth analysis. Thanks.
Thanks, Alder Foster. So I had also invited members of the Transportation Commission to join this meeting because they are the body that sort of oversees Metro. So we have Chair Kovich is here, and she's up next. So go ahead, Ann.
Thanks so much, Tom. Really good presentation, Justin. A lot of information, and I understand you have a lot more that you didn't have time to present tonight. So, you know, I'll be very interested in seeing how the Transportation Commission can work together with the Transportation Policy and Planning Board. Since the TC is responsible for setting fares and for the implementation, we appreciate the opportunity to be involved and asking some questions and becoming familiar with this and looking at implementation issues. And I want to raise something that, Margaret, you'll be really familiar with this from a 2-hour public hearing we had at the TPC on paratransit back in October of 2017. So understanding how this would work with paratransit and for people with disabilities, whether they're riding BRT regular routes or using paratransit. You know, there was a significant discussion about the importance of not just using cash payments for paratransit. As people with disabilities who have government disability income, their parents can buy tickets for them, but they can't give them cash, or it limits their ability to collect disability payments. So there's a lot of very complex issues in that regard. But, you know, one of the brief comments you made was how to integrate this with paratransit. And so you may not be in a position to answer tonight, but that's something that I'd be interested in hearing a lot more about, is the pros and cons for people with disabilities on BRT, on regular routes, and on paratransit, and how we can integrate them. My sense, Justin, from what I heard you say and the research I've done, is that having one system and the account-based system that you're talking about, I see that as having a good benefit for people with disabilities and integrating all three of these systems together. So I think that's a big pro that would be really important to bring forward. So I don't know if you want to comment on that tonight, and we can certainly work on the how we integrate this with the TC. So thanks for the invitation, Tom, and I'm happy to answer any other questions if I can.
Yeah, I could, if I could weigh in on that a little bit, just add a little more context.
Yeah, go ahead, Justin.
So yeah, I think there's a lot of potential benefits there, not least of the challenges that one on paratransit, paying cash is sometimes a barrier, both in terms of having that cash, but also depending on a person's level of disability, being able to handle that cash. And so one thing that is possible with this, I mentioned tap cards over and over in this, but really it's a tap chip. And those chips can be rolled out in a lot of different ways, including, and this has been fairly common for those with disabilities, they can be formatted into kind of a bracelet, where all you need to do is just kind of tap your arm to the reader, and you don't have to reach into a pocket and try to pull stuff out, which can really help ease the burden for those, again, depending what type of disability you might have. But that option is opened up, and that makes boarding the fixed route, the regular bus, easier, but also allowing that option on paratransit makes that quite a bit easier as well.
Yeah, so it'd be great, Justin, if you could highlight some of these advantages and how people with disabilities are impacted in all the various alternatives for Metro. I just see it as being a lot of possibilities and could be very positive. So I'm glad to hear that. Thank you.
Margaret, go ahead.
Thank you. Justin, thank you for this overview. And a couple of things that caught my eye or caught my attention, particularly in the context of the RFP that's going to be going out for the technology project for Metro, which involves integration of everything from dispatch, vehicle location, fare collection, accounting, HR, timesheets. It's a big project, and you've been, and I think that the RFP is being packaged in a very interesting way and one that's not familiar to a lot of us in Madison. And I think it would be worthwhile if there were a review with this body about that project. This came in front of the TC at its last meeting, so people can go back and look at that discussion too. But in the context of that, in that kind of investment, in the context of the fact that the university has to, everybody has to reevaluate all of their card technology, right? Because it's changing so quickly. The standards are changing quickly. There are many complex issues involved, security, et cetera. So I'm curious, on one of your slides, you had an estimate of the cost of collection at about $500,000 a year. So tracking, I know that I'll want to see how you arrived at that number. And of course, there's the operational cost of collection and there's the capital cost of collection. So how that divides out as well. A couple of other things. John Becker already raised this, but the security problems related to free fares. I know that Metro used to, and maybe still does, produce a report quarterly on customer complaints and incidents and whatnot that categorize problems on the bus and compliments as well, but would include things like security problems on the buses. So if that information could somehow be packaged in as part of this report as well. And because obviously this what you gave us was just a little taste of this report that you're doing, right? But for all I know, the kind of security problems you had came from there being too few people passing through the transfer points because ridership was so low. But I do know that other systems did have problems with, for example, people boarding buses and staying on buses for the entire span of service. So giving us some kind of idea of what the problems really would be helpful. And then access for the unbanked and different ways that can handle. I mean, in a way, I think Alder Foster is right. It's almost like two different reports or three different reports here. One being on the idea of going fare free and the other being on the technology of collecting fares and making that, and how you make that both possible and equitable. So I'll be interested to see what your research told you about systems like Masabi, which claim to offer access for the unbanked, similar to what you were describing with your ticket vendor, people being able to load cards, etc. There are a lot of different vendors out there wanting to sell systems of a lot of different technologies. So if you can help us walk through that minefield and really explain how that integrates with your HR system and your accounting system and your national transit database system. I know that's a small ask, but that's the kind of information I think everybody needs to have a grasp of.
Are you asking me to comment on that or in the reports and
in the final? Yeah, no, I want you to answer that right now, just all of that. No, in the final report.
Do you have another hour?
Yeah, no. Always. No.
All right, thanks, Margaret. Alder Foster, you're up next. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Just wanted to give feedback on your other questions at the end there around sort of the future meeting location and structure. So I think from my perspective, certainly the question around fare free or not, and I think also by extension the question of like overall method of how we go about this, to me seems like primarily a policy issue. So I would recommend TPPB for that part of it. I think, vendor selection, actual pricing, where those cutoffs are for maximums, et cetera, all that kind of stuff to me seems like TC. But I think to kind of the level of questions you're asking tonight seems like it would be good to happen at the policy board. And public meeting versus public hearing. I mean, functionally, it's not going to be a very big difference, but I think just in the interest of getting the most public input possible on it, since it would be a big change and it's an important issue. I mean, I think publishing it as a public hearing, making sure everybody's got a good opportunity to say what they want to say would make sense. So I think I would just recommend going that route of a public hearing at TPPB on these high level questions.
All right, thanks, Alder Foster. Ann Kovich, go ahead.
Just a really quick follow-up, Justin, something I forgot to mention. It sounds like you know who uses cash payments today. Is that information that you have that you'll be sharing in the report? And if not, I think that'd be interesting to know if you can collect that data, because that's certainly going to impact how you mitigate that.
So unfortunately, we don't have a good handle on who those folks are. We do know that, it's less than 10% of our boardings. But the way that we would collect kind of demographic information on who that is largely through an onboard survey. Ours is very old right now. It should have been updated last year. Obviously, a survey where you get on the bus and talk to people and hand out paper surveys is not something that's great during this age of COVID. So the data that we have is old and doesn't specifically ask this question. And so that's an unfortunate situation, but it's going to be probably, maybe by the end of this year, early next year, we could actually do a survey. But it's going to take another 6 months to analyze all that data. And then we're looking at summer of 22 and we're too late to implement something for the BRT system. We unfortunately will need to make that decision a little earlier on.
All right, thank you. Any further questions, comments, recommendations? So we'll be seeing this again, obviously. But if there are no, if there's nothing further, then that's all we have for the evening. So I'd entertain motions to adjourn. Somebody's got to want to go home. Looks like motion by Chris, second by Badri. All right, all those in favor of adjourning tonight's meeting, please unmute yourselves and say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, no.
Aye.
It appears to be unanimous. Electors adjourned, no vote, raise your hand. Otherwise, have a good evening, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.